through the chapter like quick and like re-explain overall what it is, or you tell me?
Yes, please.
That helps. Okay.
Yeah, a quick refresher, please.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. Let me go back to the beginning of the chapter. Okay, so chapter 5 is all about a broker, and a broker must have a main office. It has to be licensed, and they can have as many branch offices as they like. Those also have to be licensed. If they want to close a location, they cannot transfer a license. They have to cancel the one license and then ask for a new one. And temporary shelters are not offices, so they don't need to be licensed. They do not need to have signs. An office sign has to be visible as you enter, and it has to have at least 3 things on it: company name, broker's name, and the words licensed real estate broker. Anything else is optional. When it comes to advertising, sales associates may advertise in their own name, but every time they have to get their broker's permission. If they use their own name, they must include their last name as well. And if they include their phone number, then they must include the brokerage phone number as well. Advertising is anything. So it could be pens, magnets, websites, etc., signs. Team and group advertising is when they create like a little subgroup within the brokerage, but it's not separately licensed. It's just something they call themselves, like, teams that all go to the same university type of thing. You can put the team name on your advertising, but you can't put it larger than the name of the brokerage firm itself. There are different types of agencies that we can use. There's also different names such as LLC, corporations, S Corp, etc. We will get into those a little bit. Blind advertising is when you hide who's behind it. You cannot do that. You have to put point of contact information like a phone number, an address, etc. You can't hide who's doing the actual advertising. False advertising, that's self-explanatory. Internet sites, they have to have that point of contact information, but they also have to have some type of opt-out option. So when you're selling your own property for sale by owner, you can put a sign in your front yard that says for sale by owner. You don't have to put on the sign that you're a licensed sales associate, but you do have to mention that before you get into negotiation, because of course you have the upper hand or the advantage over the novice person. If you want to put your house on the MLS, then that's from the brokerage, and then you would have to let your broker list the property, because you don't have direct access to the MLS yourself. You're going underneath your broker, and your broker is the one that allows the listings to go on the MLS. Telephone solicitation, they're allowed to randomly call you from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. unless you're on the do not call list. And the do not call list doesn't mean they won't call you, but at least they're violating the law if they do call you, which you can report them. There's a fine. The fine doesn't go to you. It goes to the FCC, and it doesn't keep them from calling you anyhow. Now, the exception to that is if you call somebody randomly because you're driving through the neighborhood and you see for sale by owner and you call them, you're not in trouble because they're soliciting themselves. But let's say you randomly call a phone number and they are on the do not call list. If you know that person somehow and you had contact within the last 18 months, then they're not a stranger and you're not in violation. But when it's been longer than 18 months that you've talked to them, then they become a stranger and then you're in violation. As we said, the Canned Spam Act is when you're sending junk emails and you have to give them an opt-out, and it has to be honored within 10 days. But I get those every single day, and they just do it from different phone numbers, but I get the same junk all the time, and I keep opting out or unsubscribe or hit, junk and report them, and it still comes through. So there's always, you can't avoid it. Escrow accounts. This is an account that they put separately that's going to hold the deposits from the buyer who wants to give a good faith deposit to take the house off the market. And so they call it binder, they call it good faith, they call it earnest money. Doesn't matter what they call it, it's a deposit because you want to purchase that property. So then they take it off the market, and then the contract, will learn about that in chapter 11 about, how things fall in time. But for the broker, they have to decide what to do with that deposit money. It's not theirs. They can't keep it, use it, spend it. They have to put it into some type of escrow account. So the three choices for the broker is either they can open up a Florida bank account, or they give it to a Florida attorney or a Florida title company who's going to do the closing. They all have to be Florida based. The sales associate, when they receive the money, they have to turn it over immediately to their broker. And the definition is by the end of the next business day, from sales associate to the broker. The time for the broker to immediately put it into one of those escrow choices is by the end of the third following day from whenever anyone in the company touched the money. So if the sales associate received the money, the moment they receive it, the clock begins to tick. The day you receive it is day 0. The following business day is 1, 2, and by the third day, the broker has to put it in. Let me give you an example of a state exam question. The one that I remember, it said a sales associate is so excited that they got their first deal. On the way back to the office with the escrow deposit, they have a car accident. They're in the hospital in a coma for 5 days. When they're released, they immediately go to the broker and turn the money over to them. How long does the broker have to put it into an escrow? One answer says same day. The other one says the next business day. The other answer says by the end of the third following business day. Or D, both the broker and the sales associate have missed the deadline and are in violation of Chapter 475. Which one do you think that is? Anyone? Is it same day? Is it A, same day, B, next business day, C, third following business day, or D, they're both in violation, they missed the deadline, and they're in violation of Chapter 475?
Is it D?
D?
It is D. Longest answer, but also correct answer. So it's 5 days in the coma. People don't like to go with D because they think, oh, but they're in the hospital, they can prove it. Did I ask you anything about the hospital and proving it? No. They're in violation because they're late. Now, just because you're in violation doesn't mean you're in trouble, because if they investigate and someone accuses you of depositing the money late, you can easily prove that you were in a coma, and you can show them receipts from the hospital, and you can show that you tried the next day to give it to your broker or whatever, but it doesn't change the fact that you're late. The broker has the responsibility of putting the money into escrow by the end of the third following business day. So in the state exam, even if something seems a little bit harsh, you have to follow the rule. And they didn't tell you about there's this exception and that exception and this. They're just telling you. They're saying, which following is true about the deposit? Well, it's not on time. They're both in violation. Again, violation because the rule says sales associate to the broker by the next business day. The broker to the deposit is the third following business day. So, don't be fooled by that kind of stuff. So the word immediately means different things for the sales associate and the broker. Personal checks, post-dated checks, etc. If the check bounces, what to do? You ask the seller. Ultimately, the money belongs to the seller if the deal is going to go through. So you ask the broker, you ask the seller, is it okay to take a personal check? Is it okay to take a post-dated check? The check bounce. Do you want to cancel the deal or whatever? The seller gives you direction. If the broker has a bank account, Florida bank account for the deposits, the broker has to be listed as one of the signatories on the account. They might be the only signatory, but they have to be at least one of the signatories because they have to have ultimate control of the money to get it where it needs to be. If there's interest that goes to account, both the buyer, the seller, and the broker agree in writing before they get into the contract where that money goes, who gets to keep the interest. The broker, if they open up an escrow account, they're allowed to put up to $1,000 of their own personal money into the bank, so that way they can open the account and maintain it for like the miscellaneous fees. If it's a property management company, they can keep up to $5,000. Records must be kept for 5 years after the fact. Do not mishandle the escrow. Conversion is when you spend someone else's money without permission. Commingling is when you just deposit it in the same account and mix the business money with the personal money. Failure to account and deliver is when you can't produce the deposit, something happened to it, maybe through carelessness, and so you fail to account and deliver, and that's a problem. If you just give the money to a title company or a Florida title company or a Florida attorney, the broker is not responsible for that money. If there's a problem and the deal doesn't go through, then the buyer and the seller have to contact the Florida title company or the Florida attorney and get their money through them. As the broker, you're out of it, so that way you don't lose your license over these arguments. There's a different process if they're fighting over the money, which we will talk about. So within 10 business days, the broker has to get proof that they gave the money to the Florida title company or the Florida attorney. Okay, now exceptions. Well, let's talk about conflicting demands. The buyer and the seller are fighting over the money. What happens next? Again, if you give the money to the Florida title company or Florida attorney, none of this is true. It's not your problem, not the broker's problem. If the broker decides to keep a Florida bank account and that's where they're holding the escrow money, then they have to follow a settlement procedure within 30 days. There are 4 choices of what that procedure could be. The broker chooses which one of the 4 they want to implement, and maybe they might try another one as well. These are in no particular order. They could try mediation, which is negotiation, or they could try arbitration, where the arbitrator, whatever they say, it's a final order that's binding. They could try litigation, meaning going to court, or they could ask FREC's advice through an EDO, escrow disbursement order. FREC can give advice as long as the deposit is less than $50,000. Usually FREC doesn't want to give advice, and so they might send a letter back saying, why don't you choose one of the other options? If you ask FREC's advice, but in the meantime, you resolve it with the buyer and the seller, you have to call FREC off, and you have up to 10 business days to cancel that and let them know you no longer need the EDO. If they do agree to give an EDO, the broker still has a choice to follow it or not. If they follow it, then if anything bad happens, it's not their fault because they just followed the advice from FREC, and FREC is the one that has control over your license. So you're not in trouble if you do what FREC says. If you do your own thing and there's a problem, then it comes on the broker, and the broker may have to reimburse the recovery fund, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The 3 exceptions when you can go ahead and just give the money back to the buyer without the seller's written permission is if it's a HUD sale, because HUD would be the seller in this case of the foreclosed houses. And if your client is not the winning bidder, then they should give all the deposits back, and you can do that because you have the money. And when I say you, I mean broker. The second one is there's a cooling off period. You have 3 days for any type of property, 10 days for timeshare, or 15 days for a brand new condominium to change your mind and in writing say you want to cancel the deal, and then you should get the deposit returned to the buyer. The third one is if the financing terms just don't work out. Okay, sales associates commission, you negotiate that with the broker. The sales associate cannot sue the customer. So let's say the deal goes bad and they spent a lot of time and money and effort And for whatever reason, let's say the seller decides not to sell because they found a better deal somewhere else. That's not correct. And let's say the sales associate says, hey, I invested all this money on advertising, this, that, and the other, and they just decided to pull the house off the market and they want to sue them for their commission. Sales associates cannot sue the clients because the sales associates work underneath a broker. So the sales associate could ask their broker to sue the clients, but if the broker doesn't want to, then there's nothing you can do about it. Sharing commission. You can share commission with anyone who's involved in the deal. Buyer, seller, broker. Those are people you can share commission with. Don't confuse commission with kickback. So antitrust laws is to avoid monopoly by people fixing prices. That's a no-no. So every single thing in real estate and about real estate is negotiable. Now, when it comes to commercial property, there's a little difference. You can put a lien against a property. On residential, you could, if the seller agrees to from the beginning that if something goes wrong, you can put a lien to get your commission, but good luck on that one. But when it comes to commercial, it's normal for the broker to put a lien against the property, whether it's renting or selling commercial property. And, you know, there's a lot of money involved when you advertise or put billboards up to sell commercial property, and a lot of time involved usually. So the broker is allowed to put a lien against the property. So if something happens and they change their mind, if they ever sell the property, there's a lien in place so the brokerage can get their money back. Kickbacks, love them, want more of them. Kickbacks are legal. They're okay if it's for something that doesn't require a license. The exception to that is if you have the same license, it's okay. So insurance can give insurance a commission. Sales associate can give, real estate can give real estate. They can give them a kickback. If you're in the same industry and you have the same license, that's okay. But if it's something that doesn't require a license, it's okay as well. So if you recommend someone to cut the grass, paint the house, do the tile, you can get kickbacks because that's not a licensed profession. There are different types of business entities. Sole proprietor, and by the way, a broker decides to open up their company as one of these. So sole proprietor is doing business for yourself. Partnerships could be general partnership or limited partnership. General partnership is where all of the partners, the general partners, are licensed brokers. If one makes a mistake, they all have to pay for it. So everyone goes down with the ship, so to speak. You can have limited partners in a general partnership. A limited partner is a cash investor, a silent partner. Limited partnerships are a different form of organization where they're all brokers that are the general partners inside the limited partnership. If one makes a mistake, it's their problem. They could only lose their portion of the company that they own. It doesn't affect the other brokers that are partners. Again, they can also have limited partners. Those are cash investors. Do not confuse partners, which is a person, and partnership, which is the type of organization. By the way, no matter what form of business is, you have to have at least one licensed broker who is running the office and responsible for it. Corporations are an artificial entity. And again, you have to have at least a broker running the show. But that broker can be replaced because they could be an officer and you can change officers in a corporation. If something happens to the broker, they get fired, they lose their license, they quit, they die, you have to replace them within 14 calendar days. Ostensible partnership is quasi. It's when you act like you're partners, but you don't have any legal paperwork that actually created a partnership. You give the misrepresentation to the public as if you're partners just by the way you act. So I remember that question on the state exam, by the way. So if you act like you're partners and people think you're partners because you share an office or something like that, then if one person does something wrong, The other one's responsible because they confuse the public. They acted in a way that people assume they are partners, even though they're legally not. Corporation sole is a nonprofit organization. Joint venture is 2 or more people getting together for a project. These don't need a real estate license because they're not real estate entities. A business trust is temporary. Maybe you step in as a temporary CEO, or you manage properties for perhaps a child, their parents died and they inherited a company. So they step in temporarily, but you don't get a license as a business trust. You just happen to step in temporarily in the shoes. Cooperatives are interesting. We don't really have them in Florida. They're typical in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. What happens is because they're big cities, it's too much money for like one investor to buy something. So imagine you want to have build a house in Manhattan. One person maybe can't do it, but they get together with some other people and they put their money together and they build maybe a condo building or apartment building, etc. So they're cooperating. These investors are cooperating. So what happens is they put their money in a general fund. The general fund purchases the property, and each of those people that put money in are shareholders. They're not property owners. They're shareholders who invested money in the company. The company owns the building. So again, it's not typical in Florida, but up north. Trade name is any name that's not your natural name. So, like if you open up a business called Bucket Wings, they don't know who's behind Bucket Wings. So you would have to register it and say, who's the person behind it. Trade name. So sales associates cannot create a real estate trade name because you're working underneath a broker. But brokers can create any kind of trade name they like and then register that trade name. They don't have to get a license. They have to register the trade name with the broker, making it legitimate as the responsible party. Personal assistants. You can hire assistants. Your broker can hire assistants. They might be licensed or unlicensed. So what can they do? A licensed assistant can do anything and everything real estate related. If there's commission to be had, the broker would have to pay it. So even though they work underneath you because you brought them in and you have a successful team, you as a sales associate cannot pay commissions, but your broker can. The sales associate can pay a salary or an hourly rate. If you have unlicensed people working for you, they can do everything except negotiate. So there's, the list is too long. It's better just to say what they can't do instead of what they can do. But for example, they might open up the house. They might drop off the keys. They might attend an open house. But they can't go inside the property and walk around room per room with the buyer because there's a chance they might start talking and negotiating, which they're not licensed to do. That is the end of chapter 5. Did that help?
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, let's get into this. Question number 1. It wants to know which name can a sales associate register as. So the right answer is C, because they can only use their own personal name as a sales associate. And they can put LLC at the end, but they can't put brokerage or partner because that sounds like an independent real estate company. LLC at the end of your name is just a legal thing that you can do to protect yourself against lawsuits. Okay, number 2, if the sales associate receives the deposit on Monday, by the end of business, what day of the week must the broker? So this is a trick question. They talk about the sales associate at first, but the question isn't about the sales associate. It's about the broker. So if the sales associate receives it on Monday, Monday is day 0 for both the sales associate and broker. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you get a big question on the state exam, just read the sentence immediately above it, above the answers, that's where the question is. The other stuff is distractors to kind of take you this way and that way. Because if you read first sales associate, oh, Monday, and then you went and answered Tuesday, you would be wrong. Because the question isn't about the sales associate, it's about the broker. Okay, number 3, the answer is B. If they give you a check, you just sign the back of it and turn it over to your broker. You don't deposit it in your account. You don't tear it up and say, give me another one, because maybe they don't have any other checks. Number 4, you're looking for something that's false. The answer is C. There is nothing illegal about keeping the interest if the buyer and the seller both say the broker can. Number 5 is C. Number 6 is D, all of the above. Number 7 is, let's see. Oh, let me see. Sorry, I skipped one. Number 7. Oh, this book is different. An active broker associate wants to form an entity to be paid commissions, which is the broker associate, not legally allowed. Okay, so they're not legally allowed to do Inc. Inc. is like a completely separate business that you own. LLC, PLLC is just another version of LLC. PA is the old-fashioned way of calling it, which is, professional organization. So I've never seen this question before. It's new to the book. Big deal, one of the changes. I've never seen that on the state exam, and seriously don't think you'll need it. Question 8 is different than, let's see, question 8. The answer is B. Question 9 is D. An unlicensed assistant may not. You can't show the property around, because what happens when you show it, people start asking questions, start saying, hey, do you think we'll take this much? And that starts to become a negotiation. Number 10 is D. Number 11 is B. Number 12 is C. 13 is D. 14 is C. Oh, C, there we go. 15 is C, the longest answer. 16 is B. 17 is also B. 18 is D. 19 is A. You're looking for the false thing. And 20 is C. Do you have any questions about any of those answers?
No, ma'am.
Okay, anybody else? Good?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's do chapter 6. Do you want me to do a quickie review of that?
If you could, we went over it kind of fast yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the chapter is about violations. So this is just some vocabulary. So the good thing about vocabulary is its definitions. There's no tricks to it. So breach of trust is, omitting details, misguiding, breaking a promise, an obligation. Concealment is when you hide information. Culpable negligence is when you're guilty of being careless. Fraud is when you lie. And we're going to talk about fraud in detail in chapter 11, because there's 4 parts to fraud. I'll tell them to you now. The person has to know it was a lie when they said it, and then they went ahead and said it anyhow. The person had to depend upon the information that the person lied about, and the person that received the lie has to be hurt some way. So whether it's financially or otherwise. So all of those things have to exist for there to be fraud. But we'll talk about that more in chapter 11. Material fact is information related to the transaction. Misrepresentation is giving misleading or not completely correct or mixed half lies, half truths about property. Moral turpitude is contrary to honesty, good morals, and justice. For example, arson to collect insurance, embezzlement, writing bad checks on purpose. If somebody makes a complaint against your license, there's a 7-step process. At any point, the process could stop, but they go in this specific order, and you have to memorize the 7 steps, because on the state exam, they might say, for example, what happens after an informal hearing? And then the answer would be a final order. Or they might say, what happens after a final order? The answer would be, you may appeal. So you need to know them in order. So first, somebody makes a complaint against your license. It has to be legally sufficient, which means it has to be dealing with some type of real estate law. Then they investigate the complaint. And during that process, they try to find out information. If they find information that seems there's potential danger to the public, they can go straight to a summary or an emergency suspension against your license. And that's, to get you to stop what you're doing. Doesn't mean they took away your license. It means they just want you to stop what you're doing until they talk about it and try to fix the situation. The next step is probable cause. 2 members out of the 7 FREC members will review to see if they believe there's probable cause to move forward. So even though they read the violation, it is something that violates real estate law, if they don't think it can be proven, they're not going to waste time. Remember, FREC members are there once a month to meet and do all of these things. So, they decide really quick, and maybe they decide it's not worth it to pursue it. So the 2 members that review the complaint and decide if they go forward or not can be any of the 7, but both of them cannot be the consumer members because they don't know enough about real estate law. One of them could be the consumer, but the other one would have to be one of the licensed people. Those 2 people who review it and decide if they should move forward, neither one of them can be the administrative judge, which we will talk about in a moment. After they decide it moves forward, the next step is that they type up a formal complaint. You receive a copy of that, and you have 30 days to respond. You might make a stipulation. You might say, hey, listen, let's not waste time. What would the punishment be? And if they tell you, you ask for them to stipulate it in writing, and they have to hold to that. You may agree just to give up your license or have it permanently revoked, or you could take the next step. If you agree that the accusations, there's some truth to it, but you want to tell them your version of the story, then you ask for an informal hearing in front of FREC where it's just you and FREC. If you totally disagree and you want to fight it, then you ask for a formal hearing, which the accuser must come, and you have the right to bring a lawyer, subpoena witnesses, and they also have to prove the accusations they make against you. At that hearing, an administrative law judge, which is somebody else from FREC who hasn't already heard the case, will step forward and make a decision, and they will make a recommended order, which you always have the right to appeal. During the appeal process, if you don't want to be out of business, you can ask for a stay of enforcement. If they agree to the stay, the agreement is called the writ of supersedeas. So when you just ask for it, doesn't mean you're automatically granted it. You ask them, hey, listen, don't put me out of business. I want to appeal this. I want to hire a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. So then if they agree, then they will suspend punishing you for the moment. They'll put it aside to give you a chance to have another date in front of FREC, etc. If they agree to that, the name of that is called the writ of supersedeas. which the school exam is going to ask you about, and the state exam is going to see if you know the difference between what those two things are. Okay, what are the penalties that if you do get found guilty? There are different levels of penalties, but they can never put you in prison. FREC could recommend you go to prison, but they don't have authority. FREC are not lawyers, they're not police, they're not judges, so they cannot find you guilty of criminal. They can charge you a fine, they could suspend your license, revoke your license, but they cannot put you in jail. That's question 47. So what type of punishments could they do? Well, first, if it's your first offense, by the way, I had this one on my state exam. If it's a minor offense and it's your first time doing something wrong, they can just give you a warning and 15 days to go fix it. So after 15 days, you have to show some kind of proof that you fixed the problem. And if you don't, then it turns into a citation. A citation is like a ticket. And then you got 30 days to respond to that. So what kinds of things could they do? Again, reprimand. They could deny renewing your license. When they say probation, that's not probation from jail. That just means like they might watch you for a while. They might charge you a fine. They might suspend your license or revoke your license. And then, if you want details, you can read those. So what are the fines? Up to $5,000 maximum. Suspension up to 10 years. Revocation, this is permanent. If they take away your license, you can't go get another one. But revoking without prejudice is when they made some kind of administrative error. Maybe they misspelled your name on the license. They're going to revoke that license, and then they're going to issue you a new one with a different license number with the correct information. So on the website, when you pull up your name, you'll see two different things. One says revoked without prejudice. So they took your license away, but it's not your fault. And then another one will show what your correct license is. Okay, civil penalties. There's civil and there's criminal penalties. So civil penalties is just money. Criminal, there are 3 different levels. There's second-degree misdemeanor, third-degree misdemeanor, and then first-degree felony. They put third-degree felony. Third-degree felony is the most severe because misdemeanors are less than felonies. So second-degree misdemeanor is the fine is anywhere from $0 to $500 and imprisonment 0 to 60 days. Again, FREC cannot put you in jail, but that would be the suggestion if you violate it and made a second-degree misdemeanor. So first-degree misdemeanor, it's up to $1,000 fine and up to a year in jail. First degree is easy to remember. Everything is 111. First degree, $1,000, 1 year in jail. And there's only one example in the book of a first-degree misdemeanor, which is if you sell a rental list that has inaccurate information, then it's your fault because you sold the list. Anything else, like false advertising, would be like a second-degree misdemeanor. Third-degree felony, the punishment is up to $5,000 fine, up to 5 years in jail. There's 3 examples. One is if you lie on your application. 2 is if you do real estate without a license. And 3 is if you try to steal or copy the state exam questions. Here's a summary of that here. So the second degree, the only one that you need to memorize, that would be false advertising. First degree is when you sell an inaccurate rental list. And third degree is any of these 3 possibilities. If you commit a felony after you get a license, you're supposed to report yourself within 30 days. There's a thing called the recovery fund. I call it the cookie jar. So who put the money in the cookie jar? That's you. How much money did you guys put in the cookie jar?
150.
150. How much money did brokers put in the cookie jar?
350.
How much money fits in the cookie jar?
1 million.
How much money comes out of the cookie jar
50.
50,000.
per case against me? That's
Times
3.
3.
Exactly. Okay. Alrighty. Let's see. So when you try to get money from the recovery fund, the amount is a maximum of $50,000 per case and no more than 3 cases against a licensee. There are times when you are not allowed to go after the recovery fund, and these 4 are the ones. Sorry, take that back. I jumped ahead of myself. There's a procedure to do it. You have to make a lawsuit. You have to get a real judge in a real court of law to find the licensee guilty. The person has to try to collect from the licensee, and then if they can't, then they can go after the recovery fund. And you cannot sue your spouse. Now, the maximum is here, and then the $53.50 is here. The $1 million is here. So when they give money from the recovery fund, it's to compensate the money that's lost as a deposit only. It's not for pain and suffering and plane fare and meals and all that stuff. No. What happens to the person's license when money goes out of the recovery fund? It's an automatic suspension until the licensee repays the recovery fund. So if a broker followed the EDO, they took FREC's advice, then anything happens, it's not their problem. FREC is going to have to pay the buyer the money that they lost from the recovery fund, and nothing happens to the licensee because you just followed FREC's advice, and FREC is supposed to know better. Okay, that's that chapter. Was that helpful? Hopefully. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yay. So again, if you have questions about these answers I'm going to give you, you can stop me and ask me to explain any of the questions. That's what I'm here for. But I'm just going to go through quickly and tell you what the answers are. If I see something I think is interesting, I might pop up and tell you about it. So number 1, the answer is A. 2, the answer is D. Kind of the answers in the question says, who decides there's probable cause? Well, the probable cause panel. 3 is C, revoking without prejudice. Remember, it's not punishment. It's just they made some type of error on your license. Number 4 is A. Number 5, let's see, who prepares? Oh, that's B, an administrative law judge. Because it says who prepares a recommended order to find you guilty or not. Well, that sounds like a judge. Number C, number 6 is C. Sorry about that. Number 7 is B. A lot of people just go for C because, oh, the maximum is 50,000. But you don't get 50,000 automatically. You get just the deposit that's lost. So when you read it, it says the buyer gave a $47,500 deposit, but there was other money for the judgment and punitive damages, but they don't reimburse punitive interest, anything else, pain and suffering from the recovery fund. The recovery fund there is just to give the deposit that the buyer lost. So that's why it is B. What happens if you lost $500,000? How much would the recovery fund give you? What would the answer be?
50,000.
Right, 50,000. The maximum is 50,000. So if you lost more than that, you're just going to get 50,000. If you lost 10,000, that's less than 50. You're going to get the 10,000. Okay. Number 8, I like it because it's different. A. The other ones say only. And A says if. Just because it's different, I lean towards that answer. Number 9 is A. Number 10 is B. Number 11 is A. Number 12 is C. Number 13 is C. And 14 is A. And 15 is B. Why was it B and not D?
It's for one transaction.
Yes. Yes, it says from any one transaction. Look at how tricky they are. Like, I'm guilty of this. I like to just scan things. I like to read fast and I think I know. So I just skip over all the little other words. And at the beginning, it says collective. I would have gotten this one wrong because I would be thinking, oh, collective amount. Well, that's 3 cases and that's 150,000 because it's 50,000 each. But you do need to read the rest of the sentence because it goes on to say from any one transaction. And that's why it is B and not D. Okay, any questions from those quizzy wizzy questions?
Oh, ma'am, no questions.
No.
questions? Everyone good?
Yep.
Okay, so chapter 7. Let's see. That. Chapter 7 has, on the state exam, it has three questions from chapter 7 for the state exam. What I'm going to do for you guys tomorrow night, before the weekend when you're studying, I'm going to tell you how many questions are on the school exam from each chapter. Because remember, you have to pass the school exam first, right? So they could be very different than how many are on the state exam. So maybe the school exam has 10 questions from chapter 7, but the state exam only has 3. So you have to pass what's in front of you first. You have to pass the school exam first. But the good thing is you have the highlights already pre-highlighted for you in these chapters. And it tells you the school exam question. You could go through it right now and just count how many bubbles with numbers, and that would be how many questions are on the school exam. But I will give you a list of it tomorrow just to make life a little bit easier. Okay, so now we're going to talk to the laws related to real estate. We talked about the laws about getting and keeping your license. That's what we talked about yesterday. But now we're going to talk about laws specifically that pertain to real estate transactions. So let's scroll down. Do you remember on day 1, I said there's like 5 dates you have to memorize for the state exam that they're important? Does anyone remember the first 2 we talked about in chapter 1 or chapter 2?
March 31st and September something, right? No?
Oh, that's important to know that. Yeah, those are important to know. Those are the expiration dates of your license. Yeah, I was leaning more towards 1923 and 1925. 1923
Real estate
is,
law.
yeah, that's when they created FREC, right? No, sorry, it's when you had to have a real estate license. They started that. 1925 is when they created FREC to enforce the law. So those dates are important because if they tell you in 1920 this person did this, this, and this, what would they be guilty of? You know, if they say false advertising, you're tempted to go to a 2nd-degree misdemeanor. But in 1920, they didn't have real estate law. So none of the above. Okay. So let's talk about now this chapter. You're going to learn some things. Some things are pretty ugly. You know, it is American history. There's things that are prejudice against people and gender and all those kind of things. So we are going to talk about it. And you can see that United States, they're not so ahead of the game. You know, we think we're all democracy and stuff, but really it hasn't been that long since, things have been. So we need to know this date, 1866. Why is it important? 1866. So think about that. American history, 1866. We're talking Abraham Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation time. So until 1866, people were prejudiced against a person's race and not allow them to own real estate. So they could, take a guess what was the only race and gender that could buy real estate, that could own real estate. Take a guess.
A white man.
A white man.
Male.
Yep, a white man. Not women. Women couldn't own property until like 1968 in their own name. So 1866. Before that, you can even see old newspaper articles. It's for white men only. So you're anything but a white man, you could not own real estate. So of course that puts everyone else behind, because if you can't own real estate, how are you going to build a fortune? How are you going to build a legacy if you can't own the dirt you're living on, right? So in 1866, they created the Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination against race. But that's all they talked about. They didn't talk about gender. They didn't talk about other things that are prejudice. It was only you can't deny somebody the right to buy or rent because solely on their race. Okay, so memorize 1866. So we have 1923, 1925, 1866, and now we have, don't worry about 1964, even though it's the year I was born. What's more important is 1968, which is also called the Civil Rights Act. And then more specifically, civil rights covers, all different types of things, right? So this is just one part under the Civil Rights Act. So 1968, so we're talking more about Martin Luther King, like we just had the holiday. And fair housing is just one part. Other things under civil rights is like fair credit, opportunity, all the fair employment, fair education. There's a bunch of things under the umbrella of civil rights. But if they say civil rights race, it's only the name civil rights, because in 1866, they didn't think of the subcategories. They just called it civil rights. So 1866 is if they only mention about race. 1968, they add a few other things. So if you look here, let me undo this highlights. You cannot deny a person the right to rent or purchase based upon the race, color, because you could be the same color, different races, right? Religion, sex. That doesn't mean if you're having it or not. Like, no real estate for you. You don't need it. No, it has to do with if you're male or female. National origin. So, of course, some people are prejudiced, like, oh, I don't want to rent to them because then the house is going to smell like cooking, and I don't like it from this country or that country or that country. So that's a no-no. You cannot deny them because they're from a specific country, specific race, color, that, a lot of people are white from all different races, and religion, male, female. Now, they were trying, and it's trying to add two other things. They were trying to add if the person had former drug abuse, and they were trying to add same sex. So like you can't be prejudiced. Oh, and mental handicap. That's another one. So, like let's say somebody who's mongoloid, and you don't want to rent to them, and you can tell they're mongoloid because the facial structures. So maybe the owner doesn't want to rent to them because they're afraid they might burn the house down or flood the house by leaving something on, if they see mental handicap. Now it's not in here now, but that's what they're trying to add. Then some people won't rent to people who, are same-sex couples or transgender. That's something they're working on, but until now, you can still be prejudiced against those things because it's not on the list. They haven't updated that yet. So what are the things? If it's 1866, they only talk about race. If it's 1968, they add race, color, religion, national origin to the list. I remember my family moved to Florida when I was 3, so 1967, and that's 1 year before 1968. So the only thing they couldn't deny you for is race, but nothing else was covered. And I remember the situation, but I didn't understand it as a child. And of course, as an adult and someone in real estate, I really understand it. So 1967, my mom wanted to move from Pennsylvania to Florida, and we're 6 kids. And my father was in the military, so he wasn't here. So she said, listen, I can't handle the winters anymore in Pennsylvania. Can we move to Florida? He said, sure, signed a power of attorney and gave her permission to sell the house and, move us all to Florida. And back then, did you know that women couldn't have a bank account in their own name? Did you guys know that? Women couldn't have credit cards in their own name. Women couldn't get a loan, a mortgage in their own name. It had to be co-signed by a elder male, either your husband, your father, your brother. So if you weren't married and you're a single woman and you wanted to buy a property, the co-owner would have to be, a male from your family. So, your brother or your father, if you're orphan, I don't know what, right? So, but we think we're so advanced, we're not. And I remember because when we moved to Florida, my mother sold the house in Pennsylvania and had cash. And back then you could buy, 10 houses in Florida for what one house is worth up north. So when we moved, she didn't buy a house because she thought it would be easy. She's coming with cash, easy enough, find something you like and that's it. But I remember as a child, we spent 4 months in a hotel. And back then the hotels weren't really nice in Florida. They're like motels. They're actually Holiday Inn. Say what? She looked at houses and everywhere we went, nobody wanted 6 young kids in the neighborhood. We moved to Hollywood, Florida. The average age then was 72 years old. So the old people, they control the neighborhoods and nope, we don't want them. Nope, we don't want them. There's pressure from the neighborhood watch to keep people out. So she had the power of attorney from my father. I remember we found houses we liked and she went to the closing and we were all excited thinking we're going to move. And then she come back crying to the hotel room. And basically at closing, they told her, okay, so where's the mail from your family? And she's like, oh, here's the power of attorney. My husband says it's okay. And they said, no, where's your father or your brother? Can you imagine? I mean, in some countries, they still are like that. But, this is the US. 1968, I'm 60 years old. So that was 54 years ago, 56 years ago. So we're not that advanced. So in 1968, then they said, okay, now you cannot deny somebody because of their sex, so male or female. But until then, women could not open bank accounts, could not have credit cards on their own, could not get a mortgage. That's how it was. There's a thing called familial status and disability, and they added them later in 1968, not at the beginning, in 1988. So much later, took them 20 years later. They added familial status. What does that mean? Familial status is when you have young children, like my mom had 6 young children in the house, and nobody wanted us in any neighborhood because they didn't want, 6 young kids running around the neighborhood causing a ruckus. Well, they were really right. But, let's just say my brothers rode their motorcycles through their yards quite a bit. But I thought, they should be glad because I went to the little old ladies and helped them take their trash cans and stuff, that type of thing. So, speaking of which, is today Thursday?
Yes, it is.
Oh my God.
Yes,
I forgot to put the garbage out. I just realized. So, familial status, you can't hold it against them if they have young children under 18 years old. And then disability, if the person is mentally handicapped, you cannot, or handicapped in any way, you can't deny renting them or selling them. Again, sometimes people don't want to rent to somebody in a wheelchair because they think it's a liability. So now you can't do that because we have, protection laws. But 1968, they came up with all the other stuff, except for 1988, they added familial status and disability. So the current law is this list. This is the current law. You cannot discriminate based upon these things, but they could ask you, oh, this is new to the book. You see, sexual orientation. Biden to enforce to prohibit discrimination in sexual orientation. Probably Trump is going to turn that right back around. Because notice it's not on the list here. So I would imagine the next book would not have this paragraph. I don't know if that was one of his 68 executive orders on day one, but so it hasn't made the thing. And if you got in my book on this, on the 7th edition, 47th edition, it didn't have this paragraph. This is new and it's probably going to be taken out, like I said, next year. Okay, so we can skip down. Now, there's a thing called a fair housing poster. Oh, don't want to do that. That's too much. Again, these lovely QR codes. QR codes could be used to see an example of the HUD poster. So remember, HUD is short for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is, right here. And they've created a poster listing you cannot discriminate based upon all of these things. And that poster is supposed to be on display in any real estate office that rents or sells what type of property, what category? What's the only category the law protects?
Residential.
Residential. Great. So they don't have to put a poster up about commercial, industrial, agricultural, or anything else. So when it comes to buying and selling houses or renting houses that are residential 4 or less, on 10 acres or less, you have to put this poster in the office so people know what their rights are. And their right is not to be discriminated based upon their color, their sex, their national origin. Back in the day in New York, the history, how like the Irish immigrants were looked really badly upon and they had ghettos, and then you had the Italian immigrants and they had their ghettos, and then you had Spanish immigrants and they had their ghettos. And that's what in New York, that's why you have Little Italy, Little Germany, all of those different categories. And they always say New York's a melting pot. No, it's not. Back in the day when New York was coming up, everything was separated. You have this Jewish community, you have the Irish Catholic community, and basically there wasn't like a territory line drawn out, but you knew if you were in the wrong territory because the people who lived there would kick you out. Just think of the movie West Side Story, you know? And I can tell you myself, even, let's see, I was 13 years old and I spent the summer in the South Bronx. My sister-in-law was from there. So I'm 13. I've never experienced prejudice, and I did learn about it then. They let me know that I was very unwelcomed in the South Bronx. They're like, "You're Irish Catholic. You belong on the other side of the bridge." And I'm like, "No, I'm staying here in this building." And, you know, at first, I thought it was charming because people would come up and say, "Oh, you're part Irish and Scottish, aren't you?" And I thought, "Isn't that amazing? How do you know I'm Irish and Scottish? I can see you guess one or the other, but how'd you know I'm both?" And I'll never forget what they said in response. They said, "Because we hate the Irish and the Scottish and we know what you look like." So I learned, you know, when I was 13 about that. So prejudice is everywhere, you know, and it's a no-no. And at least they have laws now that you're not supposed to be. Does it stop anyone from being prejudiced? No. But if they are, then they're in violation of the law, and then you can demand your rights. So that's what this whole chapter is about. Oh, possible state exam questions about this poster. There's 3 things that are true about it. First, you have to display it in an office that rents or sells residential property. The second thing that's true is you get the poster for free from HUD. You can download it, print it out, and put it on your wall. And then the third thing that's true is kind of a reverse thing. If you fail to display the poster, the fact that you failed to display it could be used as evidence against you if you're ever accused of being prejudiced. Let me repeat that, because on the state exam, I do remember the question. It said, which of the following is not true about the fair housing poster? What's not true? So to know what's not true, you have to know what is true. So I'm going to repeat it in case you want to make a note. 1, any office renting or selling residential property must display it. 2, you get it for free from HUD. And on the state exam, they might try to trick you and say you get it for free from the DVPR, from the Division of Real Estate. It comes from HUD. 3, failure to display it could be used as evidence against you if you've been accused of discrimination. So those are the 3 things that are true. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Alrighty. So you don't really need to read these because it's residential transactions are covered. So they give you all of these examples, and, you know, this says if it's multi-housing more than 5 units, that's not residential. That's considered commercial. Now, an exception, let me see if the book still has it. If you're a individual homeowner and you own a couple of rental properties, you don't have to display this poster if you own less than 4. So imagine you own your house you live in and you own a couple of rental properties. You don't have to put the poster on a wall in your house. It's only for when there's more than 4 units, like an apartment complex or a brokerage office, that they have to display that poster. But if it's just an individual owner that just has, you know, less than 4, 1, 2, or 3, then they're not required by law. There's still not supposed to be prejudice, but they're not required by law to put the poster up. So that's like an exception to the exception. That's kind of deep. Okay. Let's fair housing for older persons. I'm almost there. Remember, I said each chapter has a different definition of what is older or who is older. So in one chapter, like it's 55 years old. That's for people to get, like the discount for the movie theater. Some chapters will say 60 years old, like at FREC, the FREC member that's a senior citizen has to be at least 60. This one talks about an older person is someone over 62 years old. Or in a community like an apartment complex or mobile home park, if at least 80% of the people occupying are at least 55 years of age, then you can call it an adult community. So what does it mean? It means you can keep people out who are too young. So if there's a bunch of old people like I experienced growing up, and they're old because the average age was 72, which is much older than this, they could actually come together and say, we want this to be an adult-only neighborhood. And then nobody younger can buy property there. Younger meaning under 55 years old. So you'll see that on some signs. It'll say an adult community. And that's what it means. So you might see a nice apartment complex or, a trailer park that, like the nicer ones. And, oh, I want to be there. And they don't let you. And you're like, why? And you think they're being prejudiced for some other reason. But then they tell you, no, you're too young for this neighborhood. We don't want you young whippersnappers. Okay, there's 2 exceptions to the rule, because every time you learn a rule, you're going to learn an exception. Religion and private clubs. Religious organizations and private clubs. They can do whatever they want. If a church, synagogue, temple, shrine, mosque, if they own the property, they can keep anyone out who's not a member of their religion. So there's some places that own whole subdivisions. Like look at Salt Lake City, all the Mormons. The big Mormon church bought up all of the properties in the main area of Salt Lake City. And if you're not Mormon, you're not welcome. So religions can get away with being prejudiced. Isn't that ironic? The religion is prejudice. Then private clubs can discriminate against anyone who's not a member of the club. So that's how, like, sometimes private golf communities like Aventura or Mar-a-Lago can keep people out because you have to be accepted to be a part of this private club. And if you're not, you can't own. So like I own another house in Bella Colina, which is out in Montverde near Claremont. And it's a beautiful golf community, but to be able to buy property, it's not just like, oh, okay, I want to buy it, I can afford it. No, I had to submit an application. They did a background check, and I had to get affidavits from at least 3 people recommending me, and I had to find one of the owners to vouch for me that already lives there, just to spend my money. Okay. So any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Now
No, Linda.
you're good. Okay. Let's talk about some vocabulary. These are all prohibited activities, but they're very specific. So there's this thing called steering. There's another thing called blockbusting. And on the next page, there's a thing called redlining. They all are no-nos, but they have different meanings when you see this word. And one of them's on your school exam. So the answer is blockbusting for question 37. So steering, imagine you have a buyer get in your car and say, oh, there's this great community that I want to go to. And and it's here. And the real estate agent says, no, you're not going to like it there. Let me show you where I think you belong. Does that sound right? No. What do you mean I belong? I belong everywhere. You know, so they steer you somewhere else because they profiled you. And this is prohibited. So I remember when I first opened up the real estate school back in 2003, there was in my class, there was 3 students, and they're, oh, this happened to me. And each of them were Latin or Hispanic from different places. And the real estate agent was very waspy, and they all wanted to go move to Windermere. And the agent said, oh, no, I don't think that's appropriate. Let me take you to where your people are, where you'll feel more comfortable. I like to give them sign language, and you know what I mean. Read between the lines. Okay. So I don't know about you guys. You're from different places, but usually people leave their country not to go move to a new country to be around the people from the country they left. I don't know. Is it me? You know? Okay. So the last thing you want to do is, you know, make it your little community. You want it to expand. That's the whole idea. So they profiled them and they took them to a neighborhood. Now we all know where the neighborhoods are. If you're Latin or Hispanic, 20 years ago, Kissimmee. And then what's the new Kissimmee? Begins with a P. The newer version of Kissimmee. Poinciana.
Oh yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, we all know. Did you know that BVL, Buenaventura Lakes, is 99% statistically by the Census Bureau Hispanic, and it's the majority is Puerto Rican, Dominican, and then 1% other. So it is true, that area. I mean, you could drive through Osceola Parkway, and a lot of the restaurants have, you know, Spanish names to them, and the grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't profile a person and say, oh, I'm not going to show you houses over here. Let me take you to a neighborhood where you'll find more of your people. You know, I'd get rid of that real estate agent, you know. So that's called steering, and it's illegal. Now, blockbusting is the opposite of steering, and it's on your school exam. Blockbusting is where I bring the people that I know you don't like to your neighborhood on purpose to break up the neighborhood. And why do you think, what's the motivation behind that? What do you think?
Lower the property value in the community, I guess. That way you can get
And
the
what?
houses for low.
There you go. To cause disruption in the neighborhood, make people want to leave, to try to lower the property values so that way somebody could buy them up cheap. And then the next thing they're going to do is try to get those people out of there, you know, and raise the prices, right? So blockbusting is also illegal, and it's another tactic that's illegal. Now, redlining is another term that's illegal, and it's when lenders or insurance company refuse to deal with somebody in a geographic area. So, you know, insurance companies, they charge you more for auto insurance depending upon your zip code, because, you know, there's more higher crime, theft, you know, different types of things. So they can't do that though. And then lenders, banks might not give you a loan if you live in certain neighborhoods. And, you know, they try to justify it by saying, well, there's a high rate in this area of foreclosures, you know, blah, 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 blah. And they might have legitimate reasons, but it's illegal to profile a person and hold it against them because they currently live in that neighborhood. Okay. So, you know, I remember years ago, it was SunTrust Bank, and they were being accused of this out in Pine Hills. And, you know, we all call it Crime Hills, ha ha ha, right? So, so I remember because I owned a dealership back then, a car dealership, and I knew they were under investigation. So when somebody came to try to buy like a used Mercedes or Lexus or Infinity, and let's just say they were trying to bite off more than they should even try to chew, and they lived in this area, I would send them to SunTrust Bank on purpose, which is on the corner of Colonial and Pine Hills Boulevard. And I would say, go to them, apply for loan. And they're like, oh, Linda, come on. You know, I'm not going to get approved for a bank loan. I know. I said, yeah, you shouldn't, because you have like 4 repossessions against you, and you shouldn't even be able to buy a bicycle with $100 deposit. But I'm telling you, go to this bank and do what I say. So I told them, apply. They're going to come out and say, no, I'm sorry, you're denied, what you expect. But then I want you to go like this and say, I want to speak to your manager. You're redlining me, in a loud voice. And so 4 people in one day did this, and they all got car loans for like really low interest rate. So they did this, and because they were already under investigation, they didn't want cases to prove it. So then the manager got real. I remember her name was Pam. Poor Pam. She came out there and she said, let me see. What's the problem? Your application? Let me see. Can you explain to me why you have this repo? And, you know, the person would say something like, well, I didn't feel like getting up to work that day, so I lost my job and I couldn't pay for it. Oh, yeah, I can understand how that can happen and you're between jobs. Okay, what about this repo? Well, you know, it broke down. I didn't have money to fix it, so I let them take it. Okay, and what about this repo? And literally, I sent somebody there that had 4 repos recently, and they got approved at 6% interest, which for that time for a used car was great. So redlining is a no-no. So whether it's a lender or an insurance company denying, they're denying because the person lives in a neighborhood. If the same person didn't live in that neighborhood, they don't necessarily, you know, hold against them. But just because you live in that area, they deny doing that for you. Okay, let's see what else. You don't have to worry about enforcement or investigation. There's nothing on there. There's nothing about agreements. There's nothing about enforcing it. None of that's on the state exam or the school exam. Fair housing, we've already talked about it. So you don't need this. I want to see the handicap responsibility. You don't even need to worry about this. Here's a summary of the Fair Housing, the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. So that's a good thing to highlight because it's a summary. It makes it all in one spot. But I want to find the handicap part. Oh, just as an example, you don't need to memorize or highlight it, but I just want to show it to you. So it was a court case. And if we read it, it was following Hurricane Andrew, which happened in South Florida in Homestead. So there was this married couple, the Benais. They lived in New York and they owned this property down in Homestead. And when all the properties were destroyed in the hurricane and their property was still in good shape, they wanted to make it available to people because people needed housing. So they're in New York and they hired a property manager, a real estate agent, to rent it out for them. And the real estate agent kept on bringing them different candidates, and they would say, no, don't want this one. No, don't want that one. No, don't want this one. And so the real estate agent got sued And this is what happened in the court case. So Arias is the person, the real estate agent. And they told the couple, hey, I found a nice little house for you to rent, or nice couple at your house, sorry. And the Miss Benai said, what kind of people are they? Huh? What kind of people are they? And they said, well, are they Hispanic? And the real estate agent said, no. Are they black? The real estate agent said, yes. Then the Benai said, nope, cannot rent the house of black people because they live in a part of the house and blah, 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 yada, 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 yada. So the real estate agent said, we're not supposed to discriminate that way. And then the owner said, then look for somebody else. Okay, what was the first problem for the real estate agent?
You disclosed that they were black?
Correct. The moment they said, are they Hispanic? They should have said, what does it matter? I cannot profile renters because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their gender. So, you can ask me about their credit. You can ask me, do they have a stable job? You can ask me if they have references that show they're good renters, but you can't ask me about their nationality, their color of their skin, their religion, all of those things. So this is just an example for you of, how a discrimination case would go. You don't need to memorize it, but I'm just showing it to you. Okay, this is what I was looking for. Americans with a Disability Act. Okay, let's highlight this. Okay, Americans with Disability. Now we learned it didn't exist in 1968, but in 1988, they actually updated the Fair Housing Act of 1968 to include handicap status. So now you have to give handicapped persons equal access to buildings. So ramps, if it's 2-story, they should have an elevator. I don't know about you, but have you been around places in Orlando? There's like offices that have 2 stories. They don't have elevators. A lot of medical plazas and this, that. There's some apartment complex that only have steps. They don't have elevators. Have you noticed any of those? Okay, so how do they get away with it? Well, maybe that building was built before the law changed. So anything prior to the law, they don't make them tear it down or rebuild it or change it. But if it's new construction, they have to comply with the Americans with Disability Act. So they have to make sure it's accessible. So it's not only stairs, inclines, but also handicap parking. And the rule about commercial property, and I don't think it's in this book, it's in the broker's book. Yeah, it's not here, but maybe you want to know that you have to have at least 1 handicap parking space per every 25 parking spaces. So in a shopping center, how sometimes you'll see hundreds of spaces, but then, only 5, handicap. And especially if you go on International Drive, I went to, what's the restaurant that has the great Cuban show, Mango's. I went there and I have a handicap sticker and they only had 2 parking spaces. And I was like, 2 parking spaces, that's not enough. And the valet were saying, well, by law, it covers, there's 50 parking spaces and we only have to have 2. And they were right. They only have to have 1 per 25. So that's the rule. And then, like I said, new construction, they have to comply to the rules that have ramps within a certain amount. And I remember the state exam, it said stuff like, some of the answers said they must have a ramp within 100 feet from the entrance of the building, or the ramp can only have a 10-degree pitch, which is like an angle, or other stuff that's not true. The true thing is at least 1 handicap parking per 25. Okay. Interstate laws when it comes to land. So when a builder wants to create a new subdivision, developers, they must register subdivisions that have 100 or more lots, not 100 or more acres, 100 or more lots. So if they're selling plots, if it's 100 or more plots in a new subdivision, they have to register that subdivision with ILSA, the Interstate Land Sales Disclosure Act. And developers with 25 or more lots must provide buyers with a property report before they sign a contract. So the disclosure that they get tells them that they may cancel the contract up to 7 days. Remember before we said when it comes to buying property and you put a deposit, how long do you have to change your mind? And we said 3 days for any property, 10 days for timeshare, 15 days for new condos. But land that doesn't have anything on it, you have 7 days. But only if the subdivision has 25 or more lots. So question 34, you need to know about that. So if a subdivision only has 10 houses, then you don't have 7 days, you have 3 days to change your mind. If it's a condominium, we know that if it's a resale, it's 3 days. If it's a brand new condo, 15 days. Timeshare is 10 days. Okay. Let's talk about deposits and rent. We're talking about rent now. We're not talking about buying a house. We're talking about renting. Okay. When we're talking about these deposits, don't confuse it with yesterday's deposits that was talking about when you want to purchase a property. This is for when you pay like first, last, security deposits, advance rent. What happens to that money? Where is it held? You know, those type of things. So deposits and advance rent are supposed to be kept in an escrow account, which should be in a Florida bank, and it could be non-interest or it could be interest bearing. If it does collect interest on your money that's sitting there because they required a deposit, and then you move out of the apartment and you want your deposit back because you left the place clean, etc. If there's interest, you're entitled to some of that because it was your money that was sitting there. But again, it has to be disclosed in advance that the landlord or the broker had it in an interest-bearing account. So the tenant is entitled to 75% of that interest earned, which meaning the landlord or the broker may keep up to 25% of the interest. Now, if it's a non-interest bearing account, then no. But if there's interest, it doesn't have to be negotiated. The landlord must turn over at least 75%. They can give you all the interest, but they are allowed to keep 25% of it to themselves, the landlord or the broker, if they're the property manager, because they're the ones that found the account, etc., etc., etc. There's another choice. So these two are talking about putting it in a Florida bank, but there is another choice. The broker or the landlord could put a surety bond with the clerk of the court in the county where the property is located. And it could be equal to the amount of the deposit or maximum $50,000, whichever one is less. So if you give $1,000 deposit for an apartment or a house, the landlord could let the court hold it But imagine you're a property manager with a bunch of complexes that you manage. So there could be hundreds of apartments, each of them with $1,000 deposit. Now we're talking more than $50,000. The landlord or broker could give $50,000 maximum to the clerk to hold on to for safekeeping, and legally they can use the rest of the money. What they do have to do is pay 5% interest to the tenants at the end. So basically, they're getting a business loan at 5% interest for the difference. They just have to give 50 grand to the clerk of the court to hold on to, because not everyone's going to move out at the same time. And sometimes people move out and they cause damage, so they don't even get their deposit back. But it's something that a landlord could do, is use that money. Now, let's say you own a couple of rental properties. You don't put that money in a separate bank account and hold it for the person until they stop renting. But you better make sure that you have that money in case they move out and they leave the place in good condition. But you also know that landlords always find something to say, no, this is a problem, and you lose your deposit. So, but those are the rules. So 3 choices, not to be confused with yesterday. Yesterday deposits for buying a property were Florida Bank, Florida Title Company, Florida Attorney. That's that. We're talking about rent and security deposits for rent. So the landlord or the broker could put it either in a Florida bank with interest or Florida bank without interest. If the bank account has interest, the tenant is entitled to 75%, and the broker or landlord can keep up to a maximum of 25% of the interest earned. Okay. See, you don't need this. You don't need to worry about renting to military. There's nothing on there. Seller, tenant, occupied. There's nothing on there about that. Okay, here we go. The landlord is obligated to do these 4 things, and the tenant is obligated to these 4 things. And the landlord has access for these 4 reasons, and I'm going to explain one by one. So by Florida law, this isn't true in other states. This is Florida. What does the landlord have to do? They have to keep the place clean, sanitary, in good working condition. They have to provide extermination, for bugs, rats, mice, etc. They have to provide garbage receptacles and make sure the heat and the hot water always work. They don't say the air conditioning. Now in Florida, you would think it'd be air conditioning, but if the air conditioning doesn't work, it's just uncomfortable. It's not like you die from it, because you could always open a window and turn on a fan and, go take a shower. But if it's too cold, then you could freeze to death. Or if the hot water doesn't work, then the pipes could freeze and break. So the landlord is obligated to keep the property in this condition: clean, sanitary, in working condition, spray for bugs or rats, have garbage cans, make sure the heat and the hot water always work. That's what the landlord must do by Florida law. If they don't do it, then the tenant can say you're in violation, and they can give the landlord a 7-day notice. Hey, fix it or I'm moving. Now, vice versa, the tenant has some obligations as well. The tenant has to keep the place clean, sanitary, and not abuse the appliances and cause them to break. So they have to be reasonable with how they use the heat and the air condition, not to make them break. And also, they can't be disruptive to the neighbors. So they can't disturb the peace. They have to be a decent neighbor, so to speak. Not extremely loud music and smells and noise and other kind of stuff. So if the tenant doesn't do these things, the landlord can give them a 7-day notice to comply or move out. So it has nothing to do with paying the rent on time. It's these other reasons. Now, the landlord has the right to inspect the condition of the property because the landlord is obligated to keep it clean, sanitary, spray for bugs. They have to have access. So they can come in and inspect the property, make any repairs that are necessary, bring somebody like an exterminator. And also, if the person is about to move out, they could actually show the property for future tenants. If they want to do that, they have to warn the tenant that they are coming. They have to give at least 24 hours notice. Last year's book said 12 hours notice. Well, that's not a lot, right? You could have fallen asleep and 12 hours could have gone by, and next thing you know, you're at home and someone opens the front door. So now it's 24 hours notice. So there could be an emergency, like some pipe break or something. Then the landlord, it's an emergency. They got to come inside. They come inside. Fire, pipe break, etc. But for normal things, if you've ever lived in an apartment complex, they usually give you a calendar, and it says on the calendar on what day they're going to do which apartments when they spray for bugs. That way you know ahead of time, to put your stuff away, blah, blah, blah. Okay, vacating the premises. When you leave at the end of the rental period, the landlord has a certain amount of time to give you your money back or not. So if the place is in good condition, the landlord has to refund you the deposit within 15 days. If there's deductions because there's damage, the landlord has to send you a letter within 30 days letting you know what those deductions will be. So that's the law. So question 15 on your school exam is understanding, when you see the highlights, that means it's right there. It's about this information. So it's going to be some question, and the right answer will be the landlord has 15 days to return the money. This is a little summary. These little boxes are good because they put it in a short and sweet thing. Any questions so far? I think there's just one more thing to talk about in this chapter, and then we'll take a nice dinner break.
Questions so far?
Okay. So, termination of the rental agreement by the tenant. The tenant can cancel the agreement if the landlord's not living up to their requirements to keep it clean, sanitary, make sure everything works, and all that other stuff. Again, I mentioned before, the tenant can give the landlord a 7-day notice of non-compliance. Hey, fix this or I'm moving. And if it's the landlord's fault, they can't keep their deposit because the landlord didn't do what they were supposed to do. Vice versa. If the landlord terminates the contract, it could be for non-compliance. For example, if they say no pets and they find out you have 3 dogs, they can give you the 7-day notice to get rid of the dogs or leave. So that's a 7-day notice of non-compliance. But if it comes to rent, it's just a 3-day notice. So it's 7 days for any other reason besides rent. So the same time period, 7 days for non-compliance. However, if it's failure to pay rent, they have only 3 days, and there's a process. You need to be familiar with the eviction process. You don't need to know every little last detail, but you have to have a general idea of how to begin it and how to end it. So what's the beginning of the eviction process? The first thing is the landlord serves the tenant with a 3-day notice. Does not include weekends or holidays. Now, how do they notify them? They actually have 3 choices of how to give them the notice. They could hand deliver it to them, they could mail it, or they could post it, which does not mean on Facebook. It means they tape it on the front door. So the 3-day notice may be served by hand delivery, by mail, or by posting. So the state exam might say what is not a way to deliver the 3-day notice. So, texting would not be a way. A phone call would not be a way. So the 3 ways again are hand deliver it, mail it, preferably certified, or post it, which means tape it on the front door. That's the beginning of the process. Okay. So then if the tenant does not respond, they start this whole chain of events, and you don't need to know the 5-day notice, the 10-day notice, the 20-day notice. What you need to know is basically what happens at the end, which is this. So if the tenant doesn't respond, doesn't go to court or whatever, the landlord will get what's called a writ of possession, writ, which is spelled W-R-I-T, of possession, like the old-fashioned right of possession. So a judge would give the landlord the right of possession, which means the landlord has the right to repossess the property. But that doesn't mean they can run over the property, open the door, and start taking the stuff. They have to hire a sheriff to deliver the 24-hour notice. So the sheriff posts, tapes it on the front door, letting the tenant know they got 24 hours to move their stuff, or the landlord may come back, open the door, and remove everything. Now, this is Florida, because in Texas, it's very different. In Texas, if you're late, the next day, they just change the locks on your front door. And sometimes they just take out all your furniture and put it in storage, so you don't even know where your stuff went. But in Florida, they give you a 24-hour notice. You have 24 hours to move your stuff. If you don't, the landlord will open the door, will move all of the contents, every single piece, to the street, because the street is public access, and they're not responsible if people steal stuff. Then the landlord will change the locks, which means they have repossessed the property. And that is like right there. So let me give you, little example that happened to me from one property that I was managing. So, I had somebody that hired me to rent out their house because they went overseas to work, and the person didn't pay the rent. So I had to go through the eviction process. So I went through the whole eviction process, got the 24-hour notice, the sheriff posted. I come out the next day, 24 hours later, with a moving crew, and I had them move everything out to the street. And then the renter shows up and starts having an asthma attack in the front yard. And they're like, and so I let them come in the house to sit on the couch, and I got them a glass of water. And I gave them the glass of water, and they sat back on the couch, and they started laughing at me. And I'm like, are you okay? I thought they were delirious or something because they weren't getting oxygen to their head. They're like, yeah, fine. The sheriff comes in and says, oh, you're okay? Okay, you need to leave the house so they can continue to move the furniture out. And the tenant said, no. And the sheriff said, no, you need to leave. And they're like, no. And the sheriff comes over them to intimidate them. And they said, hey, listen, I know the law. If you touch me, it's battery. And they were right. What I did wrong is I allowed them back in the house, which they got to repossess the house. And now I have to start the whole eviction process all over again from the beginning. I let them in the house. I let them repossess it. And to get somebody out, you have to begin the whole eviction process all over again from the beginning, as if you never had it. So if you're ever in that situation and you're on that side of the deal, don't let them in the house. If you're ever in that situation and you are the renter, go and sit inside the living room. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. How much does it normally cost to like start the eviction process?
Okay, so it doesn't cost anything to start it because what is the first step?
I'm notifying them.
Yep. So if I hand deliver it, there's no cost involved, right? If I hand deliver it. Now, to go to the court, like if I have to give it to them and then I have to wait 3 days, 3 business days to see if they respond. The respond could be the rent. And then if they pay the rent, then I have to allow them to continue. Or they could respond that I was an unfit landlord and I didn't do this, I didn't do that. But that's not a legitimate reason not to pay rent. So if they say, oh, I have a bug problem and I've been asking them for months to spray for bugs and they're obligated by law to keep, extermination. Well, yeah, that's true, but that can't be a reason to withhold the rent. The tenant could have given me a 7-day notice and said, you must exterminate and you have 7 days to do it or I'm going to move. But you can't say, no, I'm going to hold the rent until you fix it. Tenants think they have that right. For example, your air condition doesn't work and it's hot as summer and you're uncomfortable and you say, hey, I'm not going to pay rent until you fix the AC. No, you can't. It's 2 separate things. 2 wrongs don't make it right. So what the renter could do is a renter can go to the clerk of the court in the county where the property is located, and they could say, hey, listen, to the clerk, I have the rent, here it is, but I don't want to give it to the landlord because they're not spraying for bugs, they're not fixing the air condition, blah, 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 blah. So I want to deposit the money with the court. And so the clerk puts it into escrow, gives you a receipt. So the landlord cannot evict you until you get a court date and goes before a judge. They can't evict you for not paying the rent because you are paying the rent. You're just not paying it to them. So you're paying it to the clerk of the court to prove, you have the money. You didn't break the air conditioner on purpose, so you don't have to pay the rent. You know what I mean? And then when it finally will come to court because the landlord will probably try to, complain and say you're in violation. And whenever you get a court date, the tenant can say to the judge, listen, I'm paying the rent on time every month. The clerk has the money. You can see that. But they're not being a responsible landlord. They're not doing this, and I've sent notices. So the judge can say, okay, what do you want to do? You want to move out? If the tenant says, yeah, I want to move out, the judge will give the tenant back all the rent. And it's the landlord's fault that they weren't doing the stuff. So both sides have equal rights in the state of Florida. They're supposed to be equal. What's good for the tenant, good for the landlord, they both have the right to cancel the contract if the other person is not complying. So how much does that cost to actually, start the eviction process with the clerk of the court? After the 3 days, if they don't respond, then you can go to the clerk's office. Every county is different. So maybe it's $130 here, $200 there, whatever the filing fee is. And you file a case and you give proof that you delivered it and you write an affidavit that they did not respond. And that starts, putting you in the thing. There's more things you have to do. There's like a 5-day notice, a 10-day notice, a 20-day notice. There's a whole process. And every county is slightly different. But the beginning and the end is the same. The beginning is the 3-day notice that they haven't paid rent, or the 7-day notice if they're not doing something else, like if they have pets or they're not complying with other things. Like maybe they're just a really noisy neighbor and all the neighbors have been complaining, then you could start the eviction process with that. You have 7 days to comply or move out. Any questions? Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. Yay! Yay!
Yay.
Yay! We can have a nice proper break. Let's take, is half an hour good? Okay, 8:30. Let's meet back. I like chapter 7 and 8 because I don't want to say it's lighter, but it's easier to understand. It's more like if it makes sense, it sticks with you. And chapter 8 is going to be almost all vocabulary. And vocabulary is easy because it's like, memorize the definition. So let's see you at 8:30. Okay. Hello, hello, hello. All right, chapter 8. Let's do this thing. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 has 8 questions on the state exam. And I think 8 questions on the school exam as well. Oh. 8 and 8. So this gets into all about property rights and how do you what do you own, how do you own it, how do you transfer it. Notice that there's a huge amount of vocabulary, huge amount. This whole chapter is vocabulary driven, which makes it easy because pretty much if you know the definition, then you're good with this chapter. So I find it to be one of the more interesting chapters just as a person learning about, you know, property rights that maybe you didn't know about, and common words in English that we think we know what the meaning is in real estate mean something completely different. So personally, I like this chapter a lot, and it's not too difficult. So maybe we'll finish a half an hour early tonight, I hope, for you guys. So let's get into it. So you think you know what the word land means. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. The interesting thing in real estate, land has 3 components. Land is what you're standing on, the surface, but it also goes up to the sky, so everything above you, and it also goes down to the center of the earth, everything below you. So in Florida, when you own a piece of land, you own the air, the surface, and the subsurface. So think about, you have the air rights. Nobody can, have a drone over your house or fly and hover over your house. You have up to the sky, and of course the surface you're standing on, but also if you want to drill in your backyard for oil, it's your right, or if you want to dig for gold or diamonds or whatever, or water, it's yours. You have the right to it because when you own land, you own the air, you own the surface, and you own the subsurface rights. The word real estate is any improvement attached to the land. So we already learned air, surface, subsurface. If you attach anything permanently to that, that's what real estate is. So your house, of course, is real estate, but your swimming pool is real estate. A fence is real estate because those things are attached. Real property is real estate, which we just learned what the definition means, but it also includes what they call your bundle of rights that come with ownership. So we're going to learn, what do the bundle of rights mean? Basically, you have the right to buy it, sell it, own it, destroy it, rent it, keep it, do whatever you want with it because it's your property. So this is all vocabulary. If we go to the, by the way, here's where I said you have the surface, subsurface, and air rights. But here's a little diagram to show you when you own a piece of land, you own to the center of the earth, at least in Florida. You can't go beyond the center of the earth because then you're going into someone, over here in China. So the tree is real estate that's attached to the surface, the house and everything, but the air above you. So besides those rights, you have some more. You have the right to the soil, but how about to the water? So we have water rights as well, and they have very specific names to it. They're French terms. Any French speakers in class? I'd love to hear somebody with a French accent pronounce these names. Okay, so I'm going to say it like a typical hick, riparian, but French would say riparian. So you have riparian rights. Riparian, it begins with an R. Think of a river. think of water that flows. So if your land has a river or a stream running across it, you own the water as well as the land. And nobody could put a dam blocking your water rights, upstream or downstream, blocking other people's from their flow of the water, because you have riparian rights, which is the flow. You also have, like I said, a redneck would say littoral, but in French they would say littoral. So you have littoral rights to water. It begins with an L. Think of lakes or ponds. Littoral rights is the rights to water that stands still. It's not flowing like a river. So oceans, ponds, lakes. So if you have your land and it butts up to waterfront, you also own some of that water too. So if you own around a lake, literally you own like a pie wedge to the center of the lake. All the neighbors around it own a portion of it, and you have the use of the water as well as the land. So here's a little summary. Littoral, think of lake. Riparian, think of river or stream. Okay, there's some more vocabulary that you should know. And like I said, this chapter is vocabulary, so easy peasy. These are 4 more French terms. In real estate, they use Latin, French, Spanish, because it's a little bit of German. So we would say accretion in English, but Frenchies say accretion. So accretion is the accumulation of dirt. So, the wind blows and dirt gets stuck, in the valleys, and you have a buildup of dirt. Well, guess what? It's your dirt. So if the wind blows sand and dirt and it becomes a sand dune, it's your sand dune. So that is accretion, accumulation. Then we have, I love this one, alluvion. Alluvion sounds really beautiful, but it's deposits of land that's like near the top of a riverhead. Like you learned probably in school about the deltas and them depositing the soil. And that is your accumulation if you own that land. Remember, there's land underneath the water, and if that's your property, it's your land, your soil, your water. Erosion is losing your dirt. So sometimes the wind blows and takes your dirt away from you and blows it into somebody else's property. So erosion is the gradual loss of landmass due to wind or rain. This one, reliction. Reliction is the gradual receding of water, which reveals land, and that's your land. So if you live beachfront property, lakefront property, and the water starts going back, it reveals land, and now it's yours. So in the morning, if you live on the beach, in the morning, water flows up, high tide, you don't have much of a backyard. But in the evening, the water recedes and there's low tide, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of soil and it's yours. So you have the right to the soil, you have the right to the water. Because of these terms, it's a part of your property rights. Then we have the rights to anything under the ground, to the center of the earth. For example, gas, gold, minerals, water. Something that's really valuable in Florida is to be part of the water tables, and also sulfur, sulfate. People collect those things, rocks, and sell them. Air rights. You have the right extending to outer space for nobody to be hovering above your property. Now, of course, you can't stop planes flying across, but they're not allowed to stay there like a helicopter in one spot, or the space station, in outer space, to be hovered above your air, because it's yours. But also think, if you had neighbors, they couldn't build a bridge. If somebody bought the house to the left and to the right of me, they couldn't build a bridge above my house and connect and block my air. And in New York, if you know the MetLife building, if you're familiar with that, you know, in Manhattan, it's right there behind Grand Central Station. And there's a bridge that connects the buildings to each other. And they were sued because they were blocking the air rights for them to be able to build above it. So you cannot do that. So they end up having to purchase the air rights over Grand Central Station. Okay, now let's talk about real property versus personal property. So personal property is anything you can move and take with you. Another word for that is called chattel. So personal property, you know, all your furniture is personal property, your car is personal property, you know, your patio furniture out in the pool area is personal property because you can pick it up and take it with you. Real property is things that are permanently affixed. So we know that real estate is anything that is man-made that's attached to the land. We know the land is the surface, the air, and the subsurface. A fixture is something that is attached. It was personal property that you could move around, but then it's been attached. Once it's attached, it's a fixture. So a fence, when you went to Fence Depot and bought the supplies, it was personal property. When you took it home and installed it, it became a fixture. If you move and want to take your fence with you, it becomes personal property again. Trade fixtures are, you know, for like a business, for example, you know, a grocery store, and they have like the shelving or the walk-in refrigerators and things like that. Usually those stay with the property. So a fixture is anything that was personal property that's been permanently attached and now is a part of the real estate. So the example they give is like the bathtub, you know, like the toilet, the shower, you know, you leave that when you leave the house. But what about the refrigerator or the stove? Those are personal because all you have to do is unplug them and you can take them with you because they don't cause damage by unplugging them. But the tub, if you try to remove it, or the toilet and take it with you, you would leave damage behind, and that's a no-no. So if by removing it, it causes damage, you're not supposed to take it with you. But if it's something that could be detached and moved as personal property, it's not a problem. Ceiling fans are a great example. When you go to Home Depot and buy a ceiling fan in a box, it's personal property. You take it home, you attach it, it becomes a fixture. You move and you want to take the ceiling fans with you, you can detach them. You don't have to leave damage because you can put that little cover that goes on the wires to cover the hole. So those are a good example. So things could become fixtures and personal and back and forth. How do you determine whether things have to stay left behind at a property that you're selling? And I say selling because renters are allowed to take everything with them that they brought to the property. Not stuff that was there that's a part of the house that they rent. But if they brought ceiling fans, if they brought furniture, if they brought appliances, when they leave, they can take it with them. There's no question. But what about when you sell a piece of property? Some people will take things with them and the buyer will get really upset because when they looked at the house, it had one of those above ground jacuzzis in the patio, and they thought that was coming with the house. Or they might have, you know, hydroponic planters or different things. And the person assumed, and all the appliances, they assumed they were going to come with the house. But you actually have to write that in the contract that, you know, anything that's removable that doesn't cause damage could be taken. So if you want it to be left behind, the buyer has to stipulate that in the contract, leave all the appliances, or be specific, all kitchen appliances and the washer and dryer that's in the garage, something like that. So question 53 is, how do you determine it? And IRMA is an acronym that tells you these are the things that decide if it has to stay left as a fixture or if it can be removed as personal property. So I is for intention. What did the parties talk about? You know, for example, let's say the buyer looks at the house and they say, oh, this house is great. All the rooms have brand new ceiling fans. That's awesome. So I don't have to buy that. So obviously the buyer thinks the ceiling fans are going to stay behind. But the seller didn't intend to, and they take them when they go. So who's right, who's wrong? It depends on what the intentions were. Did they have the discussion? Did they write it in the contract? Relationship between the parties. Notice that it's highlighted for question 53, which is probably the answer. The relationship between the parties. It doesn't mean are they related like cousins, mother, son, that kind of thing. It means, is it a relationship between a renter and a landlord or a buyer and a seller? Renters, I already said, renters can take everything with them that they brought to the property. They don't have to leave anything behind. Sellers have to leave behind things that would cause damage if it was removed, or if it was clear that the contract said, like, leave the appliances and that kind of thing. So only the buyer-seller relationship, you have to look at the other things. Method of attachment. What they mean here is if it was detached, would it cause damage? If it leaves damage by removing it, you shouldn't remove it. So like built-in entertainment centers or built-in bookshelves, that's going to cause damage when you remove it from the wall. So don't take it, leave it behind. The last one, adaptation. So even if you could remove it without damage, is that thing easy to replace? So ceiling fans, easy to replace. You can buy them, Home Depot, Walmart, Amazon, no problem there. But if it's a special fan that fits an unusually small area, that one you should leave behind because the person can't just go out and find a mini little ceiling fan. So I've had those questions on the state exam, exactly about a ceiling fan. And I've had one about there was a yacht and it had cushions. Well, a yacht isn't real estate, but they gave this example about a yacht had custom made cushions. So even though they are easily removable, they're cushions, the fact that they're hard to replace, because you can't just go and buy cushions that are the exact dimensions for a yacht. Those have to be custom made and ordered, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the 4 things that determine whether something could go or if it should be left behind by the seller. So intentions of the party is the discussion, relationship, seller to buyer, method of attachment, more important, when it's detached, does it cause damage? And then adaptation, is it easily replaceable? So underneath this, they just take a paragraph to explain each of those things that I just said. So you can read it or skip it. If you understood what I said from here, there's no need to have to read all of that. Okay, so now we're talking about the bundle of rights. What can you do with your property? You dispose of it. You could sell it, you could give it away, you could even destroy it. It's yours. Or you can choose to enjoyment where you want to enjoy it without anybody else bothering you. So you have the right to quiet enjoyment, not to be harassed, not to have people knocking on the door. In other words, no trespassing. Exclusion, you have the right to keep people out. Possession, you have the right to occupy it or not. Just because you own it doesn't mean you have to live there. And just because you're not living there doesn't mean that other people can. You have the right, private property, no trespassing. It's an additional property you own, lock it up. You have control. So those are things that are kind of redundant and overlapping, but that's a little acronym to help you, memorize it. You can dispose it, you can enjoy it, you can people out of it, etc. Okay, now this is the part that starts some things that probably you're definitely unfamiliar with. This is terminology, vocabulary. There's 2 categories of property ownership. there's something that's called, the categories are called freehold or non-freehold. Freehold means you own it for an indefinite period of time, which could be forever, or it could be as long as you like it, but you don't know an expiration date. Non-freehold, which is the opposite, means there will be an expiration date. So you know that you could buy property that you don't necessarily own forever. You might buy the right to use it for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, kind of like timeshare in on the islands or in Cancun. You don't own that forever. You just have the right to use it for a period of time. And then after that, it goes back to whoever the grantor was. So freehold, though, in a period of time, it doesn't have a specific cutoff date. So that's what freehold means. You're free to hold on to it for as long as you like. How long you like, we don't know. So there's no date to it. Non-freehold, you're not free to hold on it for forever. It's going to expire on a specific date. So freehold, that's what that means. But underneath it, we're going to use some other terminology. So freehold, again, for an undetermined length of time, you could own it as fee simple. And on the state exam, if they say, what's the best way to own a piece of property? The answer is fee simple absolute. Fee simple means you are the absolute owner. And it's an example of freehold. You're free to hold on to it as long as you like. And if you want your children to inherit it, you can pass it down generation after generation. There's no expiration. Life estate is like it sounds. You don't own it forever. You get to own it for as long as you live. So when you pass away, your ownership passes away too. If you have a life estate, you can't give it to somebody else to inherit. It's only for the lifespan of that person. What happens afterwards? So sometimes people receive a life estate. So for example, let's say I have 2 children, and if I leave a property for one, then I give it to them in a life estate. If something, God forbid, happens to them, it would go back to me, and then I can decide who I want to give it to next. So in a life estate, after the person passes away that you're giving it to, it's called an estate in reversion, which means it goes back to the grantor. If the grantor, let's say I'm dead already. I'm dead, but I gave one of my kids a life estate. They pass away, what happens? It doesn't automatically go to their children. It would go back to my estate, and they would look at my will to see who I wanted to go to it next. So the person who gets it next is called the remainder man. So this is all vocabulary. So again, there's 2 categories. You could own a property for an undetermined period of time. That's called freehold. You could own it for a fixed period of time. That's non-freehold. Under freehold, fee simple is the best way. You're the absolute owner forever, forever, ever, 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 as long as you like. Life estate is just during your lifetime. After you pass away, it goes back to the grantor, and then it's given to the remainder man. Right there. Any questions so far?
No, ma'am.
No,
Okay. I go quick through this chapter because it's all vocabulary. And it's basically, if you can read it and understand it, kind of like a definition. So let's talk about what is homestead. I'm sure you've all heard of homestead, but what does it mean? It comes with certain rights. So every person that owns a piece of property, they could register one property as their homestead property. It's kind of their home base. You know, like when you're a kid and you play, oh, this is home, like I'm safe. So it comes with certain rights that come to it. So when you, oh, sorry about that. You can only have one homestead at a time, by the way. It protects the whole family that's living in the house as if they are owners, even though some of the people living in the house are not owners. So let's say you're not married and you invite your girlfriend, boyfriend to move in with you, and they have children. And you die all of a sudden, but you're not married to this person. And those children aren't your children, they're their children from a previous relationship. So who owns the property? So when it's homesteaded, anyone living in the house has the right to continue living in the house, but not as an owner. They don't have the right to sell it, to destroy it, to do all those things. So homestead protects, it's like a bubble that protects everyone living in the house. If there's children living in the house, they can stay until they're 18. If there's a girlfriend, boyfriend living in the house, they can stay for a while. Now, doesn't mean they can sell it, doesn't mean that they own it. If there's a mortgage, who's going to pay it? That's a problem. The girlfriend, boyfriend, they're not going to be the owner, so maybe they don't want to pay the mortgage. But if they don't pay the mortgage, the house is going to be foreclosed. So who actually owns the property? So it depends. Let's say I own a property and I have somebody living with me. We're not married. I pass away. It's going to go to my closest relatives. So I'm not married, so that's the closest relative. That's a no-no. If I have children, it would go to my children, whether it's blood children or adopted children. Okay. The person living there with their kids, they're not my blood. So they wouldn't be owners, but they do have the right to live in it for a while. So maybe that's a shock to you. So you might want to read that and chew on it for a while. And if you're in the current situation, you might want to think, maybe you want to write a will and make it clear who you want to be there. Let's pretend I didn't have any children. Then it would go to my brothers and sisters, or if my mother or father were still alive, it would go to them first. But my parents aren't alive, so then I have siblings, and it would go to my siblings if I didn't have children. So protection of homestead. Your house is protected against personal debt like credit cards. Homestead does not prevent foreclosure for non-payment of property tax, special assessments, mortgages, condo fees, etc. But it does protect you against judgment liens, like if you had construction liens or personal loans, like a car loan or credit card debt. They can't take away your homestead because you have those liens. Tax exemption. Homestead gives you a tax break, and we're going to learn about that in chapter 18, like it says here. There is a size limit. You can have a homestead, but a huge size limit. You can have a homestead up to 160 acres outside the city, or up to half an acre inside the city, meaning like downtown. So that's the size limits. Personal property, up to $1,000 of personal property. So the house has stuff in it, furniture, jewelry, and you can protect up to $1,000 of your personal property with homestead. Okay, any questions on homestead? There's a deadline to file it. You file it once. By March 1st is the deadline. You only have to file it once, and then it stays on the property year to year until you decide to sell it. And then you move somewhere else and you can put the homestead on that. Okay, we said non-freehold is when you don't own it forever. It's temporary ownership and it's going to expire at some point. There's 3 different expressions underneath that. There's a thing called estate for years, which just means, like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Tenancy at will and tenancy at sufferance. Tenancy is renters. So renters are allowed to live in a property for a specific period of time. While they're living there, they have similar rights like an owner. They have the right to enjoy it and to keep people out. Of course, they don't own it, so they don't have the right to dispose of it, to sell it. But while they're there, they can enjoy it like an owner. So tenancy at will is when there's an agreement and it's a renter. Tenancy at sufferance is when the renter won't leave. So let's say the lease is over. And it has nothing to do with them paying the rent or not paying the rent. The lease is over and the owner wants to get the property back. Maybe they want to sell it, maybe they want to move into it, but the renter won't leave and they keep paying the rent. So that's called a tenancy at sufferance, because you make your landlord suffer. Okay, so here this little summary that I told you is explained here in these 3 paragraphs, the same way I just told it to you.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, Shrees.
So that means that they can't get evicted once their contract expires, like once their
Okay,
lease expires?
Great question. They can keep paying month to month, and if the landlord accepts their payment, they can stay there that month. So down here, you ask at the appropriate time. So if the landlord doesn't want them to continue, they take the rent, it goes month to month. And if they don't want them next month, they have to give at least 30 days notice. The landlord has to give 30 days notice that, hey, listen, I don't want you there anymore. Of course, the landlord usually, in apartments, usually they send you, when your lease is about to expire, they'll give you like options. Hey, you can go month to month, but the rent's going to be this much. You can do 6 months, the rent's going to be this much. You could sign a 1-year lease, and it's going to be this much. So if you don't sign anything to renew and you keep living there and you go to the manager and you pay the rent and they take it, it's kind of like they agreed to let you stay there another month. So when they don't want you there anymore, they cannot take rent from you, and they have to give you a 30-day notice. Like, okay, you need to move out the first of the next month. So if you're renting a place, like, there's weekly rentals, those extended stays. If you rent week by week, the landlord just has to give you a 7-day notice to move out. If you're renting month to month, they have to give you 30-day notice. So obviously this is highlighted for a reason for School Exam 48. So if you're renting month to month beyond the termination of the lease, they give you a 30-day notice that they don't want you there anymore. And then even if you try to pay, you know how sometimes they give you the account number and you just wire the money, that's a problem for the landlord, because you could wire the money, they can't block it. What if you Zelled the money? The money goes into the account, so there you go, you get to stay another 30 days.
What about, like, when you mentioned earlier that they could go to court and then the court holds their rent until the landlord, can they do that?
Yeah, that's about the landlord's not responding to fixing things. It's not just about, oh, I want to keep living there, so I'm going to go pay the courthouse instead of paying the landlord.
Got it.
Paying the court is when the landlord's not responding to you for doing the things a landlord has to do: spray for bugs, provide garbage pickup, fix the heat and the hot water, keep the place clean and in working condition. So if the landlord isn't doing those things, then you can hold back the rent and give it to the clerk of the court and say, listen, I have the rent, I'm complying, but they're not doing their part. So here's the money, hold on to it. If they do it, then release the money to them, So there'll be a court date, and by the time the court date comes, the judge will say, well, did they ever fix the thing? And maybe they say, yeah, they did it a week later or whatever. And the judge will decide if they want to give some of the rent back to the tenant, or not. Did that answer your question? Okay. Tenancy at sufferance is question one on your school exam. Again, this must be the answer. So you're making them suffer. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is owning property by yourself or owning it with other people. When you own it all by yourself, it's called sole ownership. They call that estate in severalty. If you look at the root to severalty, it's sever. Sever like you cut off, you chop off, like you sever your arm. So if you own a property in severalty, it means you own it all by yourself. If you own with other people, that's called concurrent ownership. And there's different ways. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Me personally, when I took the state exam, I could not keep these three things straight. I had the hardest time keeping them and understanding them, and it was confusing to me. Hopefully, I can explain it better than my teacher did, and it will make sense to you, I hope. Okay, so if you own it by yourself, it's owning in severalty, there's no problem. When you own with other people, there could be problems. So there's different names and different rights that come with owning property with other people. So one type of ownership is called tenancy in common. This is the nice one. Tenancy in common is when two or more people, not married to each other, own property together. You know, they go into it and they buy it. They can have equal or non-equal shares. You know, somebody could own 10%, the other 90%. It's okay. They could own it at different times, like this one bought it and sold it to somebody else, their share, and that's okay. What's really important is this part on the bottom, because it's going to be important for question 63, and it's going to try to trick you. So you see that it says no right of survivorship. And you notice that these other two say right of survivorship. This is the part that confused the heck out of me. When you hear somebody say right of survivorship, to me, that sounds like an inheritance. All the rights go to the survivor. It sounds to me like I'm going to inherit something, to me personally. But the right of survivorship doesn't mean that. It means right of survivorship means all of the rights go to the last person alive, the survivor, like on Survivor Island. It has nothing to do with heirs. So notice this one said there's no right of survivorship. It sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing. So it doesn't care who survivors are. It cares who are the heirs that are supposed to inherit. So your blood relatives. You know, like I said, if you're a parent and you have children, you know, well, if you have a spouse, that's the first. But tenancy in common is not married people. It's other people owning property together who aren't married to each other. So if one owner dies, they can leave in their will the part that they own to anybody they like. So right of survivorship, you can't do that. No right of survivorship means it doesn't care about the survivors. It cares about, I was alive, I owned a piece, that piece still belongs to me, and when I'm dead, I give it to whoever I like, and my ownership continues to another person. Does that make sense? Okay. Now,
Yes.
when I'm going to explain the other one, maybe it will help make it a little bit clearer. So these other two have the same type of ownership. They just have different names. Tenancy by the entireties is a married couple owning property together. They call it, when someone's married and they own property, they call it tenancy by the entireties. If two or more people own it together that aren't husband and wife, but they want to own it together in a way that I'm about to tell you, it's called joint tenancy. So what is the way we're about to talk about? Whether it's married or unmarried, this is the way they want to own it together. They want to own it in a way that if there's two people on the deed, if one person dies, the last one alive who survives owns it all to themselves. You see the difference between tenancy and common? Imagine, forget about husband and wife. Let's just talk about a brother and a sister buy a piece of property together. How about that? Or friends buy a piece of property together. The friends in tenancy in common, each friend has a share. It could be equal, 50-50, or one could be 10% and the other one 90%. It's okay with tenancy in common. When one of those friends dies, it doesn't mean 100% goes to the other friend. The ownership doesn't die. It just gets transferred to somebody else. So if they have a will, it will go to the heirs that are in the will. That's tenancy in common. Now, let's say the same two friends don't want to own it that way. Their friends, I'll give you a better example. Let's say you have a bigger group of friends and you want to buy a house in Aspen, and every year you all get together and you go to Aspen and you like your little clique, your group of friends, but you don't want anybody outside of your friend group to have any rights to the property. So if one of the friends die, another friend dies, another friend dies, the friends that remain alive from the original group, those are the only owners, not the ones who have died, that they have spouses that maybe came later, or they have children or whatever. None of them own any part of it. So let's pretend you have 10 original owners and they decide to own it jointly. Jointly means these are the only owners. As each person dies, their ownership dies. So then the remaining people own 100% of the property equally between them. So it starts out with 10 people. So you got 10 shares, right? And you would think it's 10%, but there is no separate percentage. So this one dies. Now 9 people own 100%. 8 people own 100%. 7 people, 6 people, 5 people own 100%. The last 2 people alive, these 2 people own 100%. This one dies. The last one alive is the 100% owner all to themselves. And when that last person dies, only their people will inherit whoever they write in their will. So all the other people who died before, gone. So is their ownership. The last one breathing is the sole owner. And the sole owner can do whatever they want with the property. So that's the huge difference between tenancy in common and joint tenancy. So right of survivorship is, hey, as people die, the only ones left breathing own everything, which to me doesn't sound like a good thing. The tenancy in common has no right of survivorship. I don't care about survivors. I care about, I own a piece of property. When I die, I still have ownership. It just belongs to somebody else. My kids, my grandkids, whoever. That's tenancy in common. And it doesn't have to be equal. It could be 10%, 90%. It could be 50-50. It's whatever the people agree upon, from the beginning. The tenancy entireties is just a name for a joint tenancy where the 2 people that own it happen to be married. So it's not like 10 people can own it and you can have a bunch of married couples. That's not tenancy by entireties. Tenancy by entirety is just a husband and wife owning property together. Any questions about that? Because to me, I had a hard time keeping them straight. Because right of survivorship sounds like a positive thing, but it turns out not to be. Like if you go down on a plane, the last one breathing is the one who owns everything. And they explain it in the next 3 paragraphs, but I explained it using this. And you can read it for all the examples, but it's just, dragged out version of it. So what if you're selling property for a person and they say to you, oh, I inherit some property. My parents died and I own it together with my brothers and sisters. And so you ask them, well, how do you own it with your brothers and sisters? Are you tenants in common or are you joint tenants? They probably don't know. Most people don't know. You have to look at the deed and see what it says. So you can ask them some qualifying questions. You could say, oh, did you all become owners at the same exact time? And if they say yes, okay. Are you all on the deed? Yes. Do you have equal interest in the property? Yes. So if they answer yes, then they're probably joint tenants, but you still have to look at the deed. And why do you even care? Because one owner cannot sell a property without the permission of the other owners. In a joint tenant, all of the owners have to agree to sell. But in a tenancy in common, each owner is separate. I can sell my share to anybody I like. So you can kind of see why some people, if they're going to own a property together with their friends, maybe they want to own it jointly because they don't want, what if their friendship starts falling apart and one of their friends sells a share to somebody they don't like? Like if you watch the TV show, The Summer House, where they all rent a house and they share the rent together. So what if one of the people brings a guest that you don't like? So how to avoid it when it comes to property, you could own it jointly, meaning only this group owns the property. And as each one dies, their ownership dies. The other one, tenancy in common, if a person wants to sell their share, you have no say so if they sell it to your enemy. So it's choices. There are 3 choices. If it's a husband and wife, it's just called tenancy by entireties. Okay. Any questions about that?
No,
Okay.
ma'am.
So there's this thing co-op, which I
No, Linda.
Thank you, Savannah. So there's this thing called co-ops, which I tried to explain it in another chapter tonight and yesterday, and it is question 86 on your school exam. Again, a co-op is when a group of people invest together and no person owns the property. They own shares in a corporation. The corporation owns the property. And so people invest money and become shareholders. Only shareholders are allowed to rent a unit in the building. It's called a proprietary lease. That would be an important word to remember for question 86. So it's ownership of stock. People who are cooperative shareholders, they don't have a deed to the property. They invest it in a corporation. The corporation used the money to purchase land and build something. The people who are shareholders say, hey, I want to rent one of the units. So they have the first dibs on renting, which is called a proprietary lease. So that's what a co-op is. Again, we don't really have them in Florida because we have plenty of land, but someplace like in New York and Jersey and Pennsylvania and stuff where it's, more condensed, maybe in LA or more like Hollywood, where it's more condensed, that would apply. Okay, let's talk about condominiums. We have talked about this a few times. Remember, I told you there's a time limit to change your mind for deposits. We said 3 days for any type of property, which includes a resale condo. We said 10 days for timeshare. One thing in here is missing, and remember 7 days is for land. We talked about that in the previous chapter. Okay, this is not making me look like a good writer there. Okay. Seven days for land. So a brand new condominium has 15 days because we've said many times that there's no one to ask. So then you'd have to read the condo docs to see what the rules and regulations were and that kind of thing. So condominiums, when you purchase one, you're supposed to get paperwork. One thing is called a declaration of the condo, articles of incorporation, and what are the bylaws? What are the rules and regulations about living there? Like I said, you might not be able to bring minors or children or guests to spend the night or different things. So every condo makes up their own rules. If you don't like it, don't buy a condo in that complex. When you buy a condo, you're also supposed to get a copy of FAQs, frequently asked questions and answers, which I think is kind of stupid. On the state exam, I remember a question that said, which of the following is not a document that you must receive when you buy a condominium? And so to answer what's false, you always have to know it's true. So what documents are you supposed to receive? Declaration of condo, articles of incorporation, bylaws, and FAQs. What do you think the most common question in the FAQs in a condo is? Just out of curiosity. If you were to buy a condo, what's something that you would be concerned about?
Any fees?
Yeah, the condo fees. I would want to know, how do they determine the condo fees? How often are they allowed to change them, right? Is it annually? Is it by a vote? Is it random? You know, like, I would like to know. So in a condominium, what happens, how they determine the fees is a condo association, they have a meeting and they determine a budget for the maintenance of the condo. So the salaries of the on-site manager, the security guards, cutting the grass, painting, repairs, all of that stuff. And then they divide that by how many condo units there are. And so each condo owner is paying a portion of this budget that was determined by the association. So what if they decide all of a sudden to put new roofs on all of the buildings? You know how condos have several buildings? And maybe you're saying, wait a minute, you know, in my building, the roof is perfectly fine. And then they decide to paint it and they decide to put a tennis court. Guess who's paying for all that stuff? You are. So they take the budget. If they decide they want to do tennis courts and repairs and paint and all that stuff, that's a part of the budget. They divide it by the number of units and that becomes your share. And they divide it by 12 and that becomes your monthly maintenance fee. So your condo fees could go if they decide to do any major repairs like that. So I would want to know, if I was buying a condo, like, you know, what control is there that that's not going to happen? And all of a sudden, you know, I budget myself for like $200 a month for the condo fees because that's what they are now. But then it goes to $2,000 next month. So you would definitely want to read the condo rules to see what that is. And those are the kind of things that the FAQs cover. Okay, let's talk about condo units sold by a developer, which means they're brand new. Since it's brand new, they don't have a budget for maintenance because they haven't even built it yet. So they're going to do a prospectus, which means an estimate, a proposed budget. It's what they think it's going to be. They guesstimate it. They won't know until the next year what the budget actually is once they have, you know, and at the beginning, there's not any repairs because it's brand new. but as time goes on, the budget increases because there's repairs and maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. But when it's brand new, they have to have a prospectus with an estimated budget. When it's a resale of an established condominium, you have to give a copy of last year's financial report that says what the budget was and where the money went. And of course, the rules of the association and a thing called a governance form. These are the paperwork that you have to receive. So here's a little chart to tell you the difference when it's new versus when it's a resale. And question 23, look what is highlighted. The question might be, which of the following forms are required to give a purchaser of both a new and a resale unit? Well, the answer is right there for question 23. That's what it means when there's numbers over here. That's going to be on your school exam. Okay, timeshare. This is the only part in the book that talks about timeshare. 3 paragraphs. Timeshare is like it sounds. You're sharing time with other people. It's one condominium that 52 families own together, but they're strangers. 52 weeks. So each owner owns 1 divided by 52 shares, basically 2% of a condo. And they share in its maintenance and its costs. So that's what timeshare is. And we said many times how many days you had to cancel a timeshare and get your deposit back. And we said 10 days. And that's the only thing. This and the 10 days is the only thing about timeshare you need to know. You don't need to know any of this stuff. If you own 3 weeks in timeshare, can you sell it yourself as an owner? Yes, just like you own anything. Oh, Dorian, I like your little Yoda there. The Yoda. Is that your dog,
Thank you
Yoda?
so much. Yeah, that's my dog's chew toy.
Dog's chew toy. That's what I thought. So, anytime you own anything, it doesn't matter if you own 1, 10, 100. If it's yours, you don't need a real estate license to buy it or sell it. It's only when you do it for other people and getting a commission. So actually, you don't need any of this stuff at all about timeshare. This is the only thing you need to memorize about timeshare. You got 10 days to cancel. There's 2 different names of owning timeshare. Remember a few pages ago, we said if you own it forever, it's called fee simple. And we said fee simple is on the category of freehold. And then we say non-freehold is not when you own it forever. It's when your ownership's going to expire at some point. Timeshare, they have the same thing, but they just have different names for it. So interval ownership is when you own it forever. You have a deed. And then right to use is non-freehold. You don't get to own it forever. You get it for a period of time. And it says typically somewhere between 20 and 40 years. So Cancun is like when you buy timeshare in Cancun, you get to use it for 20 years. After 20 years, the ownership goes back to the developer. The developer then turns around and resells it. That's the end of this chapter. I said we're going to finish a half an hour early, and boom! Exactly half an hour early. So any questions? I like this chapter because it's vocabulary. It's kind of interesting. Tomorrow, chapter 9 is interesting too. We're going to talk about transferring ownership. So tonight you learned about the vocabulary of what do you call ownership and what does it mean? And tomorrow we're going to talk about how do you transfer that to another person. So that's chapter 9, which is a lot of vocabulary. And then chapter 10 tomorrow night, if you've ever studied real estate before, Dorian, that's the chapter a lot of people don't like. It's about deed descriptions. That's the lot and block, the government survey system, blah, blah, blah. You'll know tomorrow when you see it. You have handouts on
Do
your,
too bad. A lot of.
what was that?
I didn't do too bad on that one chapter.
Oh, okay, you know, that's what I love chapter 10. People either love it or hate it. There's nothing in between. And if you like doing like Tetris, you probably like chapter 10, right? Because it's all about, you know, the government survey system and stuff like that. If you're a visual person, a visual learner, you might struggle with it a little bit, because on the state exam, they're not going to give you pictures. They're going to describe something, and in your mind, you have to visualize it. So people either love it or hate it. It's something different. You wouldn't have experienced it in life before unless you're a surveyor. Any surveyors in the class? Land surveyors?
No.
Okay, so it's gonna be a thing, but the good news is it's Friday tomorrow, and if it drives you nuts, you can go enjoy your weekend after.
I have
Yes,
a
do you have
question.
a question? Yeah, Sharice.
Yours was a bit different
I
than.
did have a random question.
Is that posted as well? Because I didn't see it there when I was printing 5 and the other one.
Where are you?
And the number 8 and number 9 that number 7, number 8 that we just did was a bit different than the one that I had originally in the email. And I know that 5 changed and we had to reprint it.
Well, okay, so before class started, you guys got like a whole bunch of chapters, and then was it yesterday or the day before? You got replacements for all of the chapters. So all of the chapters should be the 48th edition. And I think today, Louis gave you the first 10 chapters. Is that right? You have them in your
It's
student
printed
portal?
from the dashboard, and I saw that there was one thing that you were going over from the materials, and it wasn't the same number. I think it was like 15 days, but it said 15 in the book, but it was 30.
Where can you find it?
Let me see. I think it was in chapter 7.
Was it the month-to-month lease, or?
I think it was the month to month.
Let me know if you find it.
It was in chapter 8.
There was a few things that were different.
Mm-hmm.
And you're using the 48th edition?
The one that he emailed us, because
Today?
yesterday when he said that he changed the 5, I only saw that one, so that's the one that I printed, the new one, the new edition, but I didn't see that he put anything else. And I mean, I didn't know that today was also going to be changed, that we needed to print the new one.
All of the chapters, like on the first night, how many chapters did he have posted? Like 4?
I found the one that I had that was in the materials. It was in chapter 8, the month to month for tenancy at will.
Okay, can you? Okay, the month to month, because it has 2 things on it, like the 7-day, the week to week, and then the month to month.
Yeah, the month to month that I printed out from the materials, that's supposed to be the updated. It says 15 here, but it's supposed to be 30 days. Yours what said 30.
Okay, so I know what you're talking about now. Let me go back.
On page 186.
Okay. Okay, right here on lines 35 and 36. So yours doesn't look like that?
Yeah, mine says 15, and this is the one I printed out from the dashboard. That's supposed to be the updated one.
So I downloaded all of them from the dashboard prior to the class starting. And I re-downloaded it today before class. Mine
Yeah.
does look like 48, but she is right. The previous one did show something else. So I don't know if he's constantly updating it or if he got caught up. But as of yesterday, mine looked like Leslie's. And today before class, it looks like yours right now on the screen.
Okay, so I can tell you how you can tell if you have the right one or the wrong one. On this page 186, if you have highlighted question 48 and question 1 here, that is the updated version. If that doesn't have numbers here, then that's the old version.
So going forward, are the ones on the dashboard all updated as well?
Louis told me that he updated the first 10 chapters. Now I'm a little bit concerned. And I hate that this happened to you all. It's just that they went and they changed books on us, in the meantime, and you had to have something to start the first couple days of class. And Michael, like, you shouldn't have chapters 11 to 19 at all. If you do, then that was definitely the old version, because after the weekend, I think Michael will have the rest of the book ready. So how can you tell, like right now, what you have, does it have this 48 and 1?
Yes, mine today, the one that I downloaded
Okay,
today
yours
does have.
does, but Charisse, yours doesn't. So then Charisse, you were using the outdated version. Let's
I just didn't know that we needed to change it because he only mentioned the ones that he mentioned yesterday.
well, every single chapter is going to be replaced. It's just the first night he didn't have the 48th edition ready because we just got it, so it's been playing catch up. So if you unfortunately printed it out physically, right? So what you have to do is this is on the dashboard now, Dorian. Is that where you got?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the two that I downloaded, 7 and 8 today, were all just like you had it on the screen. But
Okay.
I did go back and look to the ones that I had downloaded and saved onto my desktop prior to the class, and they
Right.
do vary a little bit. So he is
Yeah.
updating them.
Yeah, so the first 8 ones definitely should be all updated. So unfortunately, if you went and printed them on paper before tonight, those are the old version. How can you tell? If you go on the dashboard and you start looking at it from the beginning, and as soon as you see the first number, that the school question numbers changed and the information changed. So if it doesn't look like this, like 69, then you're using the older version, and then you can scroll through it and see that has 53, and this should be the newest one on your dashboard. So not to waste paper that you already printed, what you could do is look at this, on your computer, and then just go through and maybe take like a red pen and scratch off the old numbers, and then, then highlight the new ones, because you already printed the paper and you have good notes on there. You don't want to lose that. I mean, you were doing the right thing by being proactive and a good student, and unfortunately they changed the book. And so then, if you printed it in advance.
I can't log in. Like every time I click login, it goes to like a GoDaddy page.
Well, maybe because you're trying to use the phone rather than the computer.
I've been printing it off my phone.
Okay. Can,
How I've been doing it this whole time.
okay,
Today's the first time
Okay.
that it's done this.
okay, so, and he didn't send it to like your email, is it like on the student portal? Okay, it's just like on the student portal, and hold on a second, let me get him on the phone and ask him, if he answers the phone at this time of night, if,
Also, I
If
had a
he-
question. For the
yeah,
first couple chapters, the highlights will be different as well. So,
Right.
do you know if those are updated on the dashboard so I can go back and
Well,
correct my?
let me call him and put him on the spot.
Okay, I apologize.
No, this is our thing. Hey Louis, can you pick up the phone? I hope it's Linda and, oh, okay, it's gonna go to. Hey Louis, you are on speakerphone. I am with the class right now. There's a little confusion because some people on the phone that try to access the chapters, it's takes them to some Google page or somewhere else. And some people don't know, like they printed out the pages before the update. So by any chance, is the phone version different than if they're logging onto a computer? Yes, yes.
In person. One, please, checking. Evenings, the remote. Here we go.
Can I ask you this, if it would,
If they already, no, I was just gonna say, if they already printed out, the pages were changed recently, so they would have to
Right.
go back to their dashboard.
Yeah.
Click the course, click the materials tab, and then they get the new PDF under the materials tab for units 1 through 10.
1 through 10?
Email
Okay.
it to us possibly.
What was that, Charisse?
Can he email it to us the same way that
Yeah,
he
I was gonna exactly ask him that. That's why I was waiting for a moment to pause. Since this is a small class, how hard would it be for you to email them the first 10 chapters? Because some people like are using their phones and trying to print it from their phones using Wi-Fi.
I can get everybody's email and I can email them units 1 through 10 with the new URL.
Okay,
After they log in and go to the materials tab, they should have access to those links under the materials tab already without anything. But I can email them.
okay.
No problem.
Let me ask you this. Do you want them to put in the chat their email address for the people that need that?
If people go into the chat and give me their email address, that would be faster than me going the long way. Yeah.
Okay, so can everybody that wants a copy of it just sent to their email, chapters 1 through 10,
Yes.
go
That
into
would be
the
much
chat?
faster. I could have that almost instantly. If they give me their email address in the chat, I can copy and paste that. Please put your email address only into the chat. I will copy and paste that and get that to you right now.
Fantastic. And then nobody at all has chapters 11 through 19 because you never posted
Not
those.
not on 48.
Well, no, I mean, when they first started the class on the student portal, they have 47, so they should, so everybody do not, even though I know you want to be proactive and get a head start, if you have chapters 11 through 19 sitting on your dashboard, do not go and print those out. Those are the 47th edition.
Yes, we'll have those by Monday. We'll have those over the weekend. I'll make sure we get those updated and they will have those by Monday.
Okay, and have you given them the handouts? Because chapter 10 tomorrow has, a bunch of handouts for the government survey system, which you all should print out those handouts so you have them physically in front of you so you can make notes on them.
The math handouts,
N-
I believe the
no.
math handouts should stay the same.
Not the math, not the math, not the math. Chapter
Which-
10. Chapter 10 is not math. Chapter 10 is the government survey system with all those grids and those lines and those boxes.
Okay, so unit 10 is updated with the 48 edition. Yes.
Okay, awesome. And that's in the handout section?
No, that's in chapter 10. Unit 10.
Okay,
And I'm looking right now at unit 10.
Yeah.
And I see some figures, figure 10.7 as subdivision sections.
Yeah.
How to use government survey system.
yeah,
Sections on township that I see
Okay.
a number of
yeah, hold on a second. Silvana,
layouts.
Silvana, the material is not going to be snail mailed to anybody.
No, okay.
Yeah, not
No
physically
email,
mailed.
no snail mail.
No snail mail. It's all digital.
Yes.
I just wanted to answer that because I seen it pop up in the chat. I'm gonna
Okay.
leave. I'm not gonna exit the session, so you have time to see that on your end.
Send it out before the night's over. Put an email in the chat on Zoom. I'll
Yeah.
make sure those emails get sent out. For everybody listening, if you just go to your dashboard and click your course and go to the materials tab, those links have already been made public and they're live right now.
Okay, awesome. So, I'm finished teaching them for the night, but I'm not going to leave the session. So you have time, but all of you guys could leave the session. I'm gonna leave it open so the chat stays, so
You
you
don't
have,
have to.
I don't?
You don't have to.
Okay,
Everybody who wants the link by email, just put your email in the chat. I will get it to you. I am the master of the Zoom session, so you can leave and it'll still remain on my screen. So
Okay.
no problem.
okay, master.
Okay, no problem at all. I'll take care of that. And just put your email in if you need it. But like I said, if you log on to Cameron Academy, go to your dashboard, click on your remote live stream for January 20th, and then click the materials tab. All those links are there.
Okay, alrighty. Thank you so much for answering the phone. I didn't know if
No
you
problem.
would at this time of night, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Not a problem at all.
all right, good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Okay. I'm sorry you already printed them out physically. So you'll have to make them a little ugly and, scratch off the numbers. And the ones that are on your portal now are the updated 48th edition. But, yeah, from 1 through 10. So don't try to print out 11 through 19. On Monday, those should be updated as well. And I'll make sure, if we have time tomorrow, if we finish a little bit early. So let me give you the good news and the bad news about tomorrow. Chapter 9, it takes some time, but it is interesting. It doesn't take as much time as chapter 5. It takes similar to chapter 8. Chapter 10 doesn't take long at all. Usually it takes me less than 20 minutes, but it will be a very uncomfortable 20 minutes for you because it's weird and it's something that you've never seen before. So if we end up with extra time, which we probably will, I will go back and pull up all of the chapters and do like a review of what's on your school exam from chapters 1 to 10. Okay, is that fair? Okay, and that way we make sure that you have the right
Yes.
version of everything. And I will talk about what the questions are. Okay, sound good?
Yes.
Sounds good.
All
Yeah.
right. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Wanda.
Thank you for your patience. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. Adios, Avidazen, adieu, au revoir, ciao, Sodofis, masalama, arrivederci, boa noite, Afghanistan,
Linda,
shalom, yes?
sorry, I had a quick question before our first break. You were telling a story about a tenant that was having an asthma attack. My computer shut down and restart. I didn't catch the end of that story. He came
Okay.
in and started breathing. Did what?
It was a she, and she sat down and started laughing at me. And then the police officer came in and said, ma'am, you know, you need to leave. And she said, no, I don't. And he's like, ma'am, you really need to leave. And she says, touch me, drag me out of here, and I will sue the city because that will be battery. And he calls his supervisor, and his supervisor said, yeah, don't touch her, leave. And it was my fault because I allowed her to repossess the property because the eviction already happened. She was being kept outside by, you know, the officer wasn't letting her inside. I'm the one that felt sorry for her. I'm the sucker who felt bad. This person's having an asthma attack, and I had them come in the house and sit down on the couch, and I got him a glass of water, got her a glass of water. And then she's like, at first outside, she was like, and when she came in, she was like, like this, you know? And
So you had to
And
put up with her for how long?
well, I mean, it happened like immediately, you know, like outside, she was like, and then, you know, as soon as I let her inside, she sat there and I gave her the water. And then I said, oh, are you better now? And she said, yeah. And then, you know, I had the people that were moving the stuff all out to the curb, and she was sitting on the couch. And so I was like, okay, we need to move that. And then she's just sitting there, you know, on it. And then the police officer came in and he's like, ma'am, you got to move. And she's like, nope, I don't. No, ma'am, you have to move. Nope, I don't. And then, and he said, you know, he tried to intimidate her, get close. And she said, touch me, I'll sue the city. And once you allow somebody back in the property after they've already been evicted, it's your fault. So it's like they took over, not ownership, but possession again. What is 9/10 of the law? Possession, right? So the fact that I have something, you know, the fact that I'm holding this cup, 90% of people would think it's my cup because I'm in possession of it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be my cup. So the law is for whoever has possession of something, 90% of the time it goes with that person. And then you have to fight, you know, for the 10, you know, the 10% part has to fight for it. So yeah, that's how it goes. So it took me months and months to get her out after that because I had to start the eviction process all over again. And it was worse this time because the first time she had a lease and she didn't pay the rent. So when you evict somebody, you have to put Y, and it's for non-payment of rent. After the eviction supposedly gets canceled, she doesn't have a lease anymore. So now it's like a squatter. You ever hear of squatter rights? So squatter rights are like hard because they're not in violation of a lease because they don't have a lease. So now it gets more difficult. And so then, you know, when you go to court, they allot so much time for each type of case. So sometimes the courtroom will be empty and you're like, hey, why am I waiting months and I'm not getting a court date? Well, maybe they allowed this date for the divorces and this date for the evictions and this date, you know, for something in the courthouse. So they have so many for this type of eviction, that type of one. So squatters' rights. And it took me 5 months to get her out after that. And on the final date, no, she moved. She left.
So she
Couldn't-
didn't have to pay anything in those 5 months. So she wasn't
Didn't-
entitled to.
Exactly. Didn't pay a penny. And then she was ready. The final day, I remember she had everything already in boxes and like ready in the garage for at the moment, you know, like all the extra stuff and just her, you know, clothes and things she put in a suitcase. But she was ready to go, you know, like, you know, when the last day came. So it's crazy because you would think that, you know, the law can get them out immediately, but no. So if I didn't let her in the house, what would have happened? You know, ambulance could have come and picked her up off the grass if she was really having an asthma attack. But if she stayed out, I could have brought her water, you know, and went to the street and give it to her in the street. But once everything goes into it has to go in the street. It cannot be on the sidewalk, in the grass, you know, like in the swell. It has to be on the road because the road is public access. Because if I put her possessions on the grass in the yard, I'm almost inviting her to trespass on the property. So once everything is out on the road, then the landlord gets to change the locks because they have repossessed the property. And then the sheriff usually warns that person, hey, you are trespassing. And, you know, and that's how it goes. It's crazy the things that you're going to learn in this class because you think, what? Really? The law doesn't protect this, that, and the other? You know? Just like the thing we saw tonight. It talked about Biden. So that's a current thing that he's trying to add. You know, you cannot discriminate against same sex. I don't expect that to be there the next round of books, you know, with the current administration, because they undid all of that stuff, you know, especially in the state of Florida, you know, with the schools and all of that craziness saying, oh, your kids are going to get a sex change operation when they're in school. You know, that stupid stuff they were talking about, you know, during the election. So we'll see. Things change.
Thank you for explaining that to me.
You're welcome. Good night. Bye-bye.
You have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.